Welcome back to another story on Fiction Blue. This time, we're bringing you, Harry used accidental magic at age 4 to record every Dursley abuse and the memories sent themselves to the ministry. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Remembered the First Time Harry Potter Performed Accidental Magic. He was 4 years old and crying so hard he couldn't breathe. It wasn't the famous kind of accidental magic. No sudden gusts of wind, no glass dissolving, nothing that would make a person stop and stare. It was quieter than that. More interior. Like something deep in his chest cracked open just enough to let a little light leak out, and that light went looking for somewhere to go. He was in the cupboard under the stairs. This was not unusual. The cupboard was where Harry slept, where Harry went when Dudley broke something and needed someone else to blame, where Harry sat when Aunt Petunia decided that the sight of him ruined her appetite, which was often. Tonight it was because he'd eaten the last biscuit. He hadn't known it was the last one, hadn't even known there was a rule about last biscuits, but there was apparently a rule about everything in the Dursley household that Harry would only learn about by breaking it. His cheek still stung from where Uncle Vernon's hand had caught him. Not the open palm, just the edge of it, on his way past, a kind of casual correction, the way you might cuff a dog that had gotten underfoot. Harry pressed his knees to his chest in the dark and tried to think about something else. He was good at that, better than most 4-year-olds, though he had no way of knowing that. He thought about the garden, which he liked when no one was watching him in it. He thought about spiders, which he found genuinely interesting in a way that bothered Aunt Petunia considerably. He thought about the clouds he'd watched that afternoon through the kitchen window, the way they moved like they were going somewhere on purpose. But the crying wouldn't stop, and eventually his body did something that bodies sometimes do when they've run out of other options. It stopped fighting and let the feeling move through instead. It came out of him like breath. Like heat. It wasn't painful, or even particularly strange. It felt, if Harry had to describe it, like sighing, but from somewhere deeper than lungs. The magic moved. It didn't do anything visible. No glow, no crack of displaced air, no scorch mark on the ceiling. It just went, the way water goes when you spill it, finding the lowest point, the most natural path, without consulting anyone about the route. What it left behind, in the air of the cupboard, was something like an impression. A memory shape. The stinging cheek, the biscuit, the dark, the size of the door above him, and how certain he was that it wouldn't open again until morning. Harry fell asleep not knowing he'd done anything at all. The magic, however, was not finished. Over the next 6 years, it happened 47 more times. Harry never knew. The events themselves he remembered in the way children remember sustained unhappiness, not as individual incidents but as a kind of permanent weather, a pressure in the atmosphere of everyday life. But the magic remembered more precisely. It recorded with the fidelity of something that had no reason to protect anyone's feelings, no instinct toward mercy or minimization. It caught light and sound and the precise dimensions of shame. The cupboard. The systematic exclusion from Dudley's birthday celebrations, Christmas, any occasion that might have made Harry feel, even briefly, like he was part of something. The meals skipped, the portions halved. The names, freak, boy, nothing, delivered in tones ranging from hot contempt to cold boredom, which was somehow worse. Vernon's hands. Petunia's particular genius for making love feel like a resource other people had legitimate claim to and Harry did not. None of it was hidden. The Dursleys had no reason to hide it. Harry was a secret they kept from the neighbors, but the treatment itself, the casual, daily architecture of his diminishment, happened in broad daylight, in the kitchen, in the garden, in the sitting room with the telly going. They weren't ashamed. That was perhaps the most clarifying thing about them, they thought they were being reasonable. The magic collected all of it, and then, guided by something that wasn't quite instinct and wasn't quite intention but lived somewhere in between, it began to send. The Department of Mysteries sat at the lowest level of the Ministry of Magic, beneath 9 floors of bureaucratic noise, beneath the fireplaces and the memos and the canteen that perpetually smelled of overcooked pumpkin. It was a place that ran on secrecy the way other departments ran on paper. in great quantities, often pointlessly, and with tremendous institutional pride in the doing of it. The Unspeakables had a room they called the archive. It was not officially called anything, because officially it didn't exist. Unofficially it was where things went when they didn't fit anywhere else, magical objects with unclear provenance, prophecy fragments that didn't resolve cleanly, correspondence that predated the current filing system by several centuries. The archive smelled like old parchment and something electric, the way air smells just before lightning. Lyra Voss had been an unspeakable for 2 years when she was assigned to the archive, which was generally understood within the department to be a polite way of saying she'd asked too many questions in the wrong tone of voice. She was 26, methodical, and constitutionally incapable of leaving something unexplained. Her supervisor, a man named Cruz who had been in the Department of Mysteries for so long that he'd taken on some of its qualities, opaque, difficult to locate, tending to appear when least expected, had looked at her across his desk and said, "Boss, I'm putting you on archival review." "What am I looking for?" "Nothing specific." "Then how will I know if I find it?" He'd smiled thinly. "You'll know." She'd been in the archive for 3 weeks when she found the first one. It was in a box that had been misfiled under miscellaneous residual emanations, unresolved, which was where things went when no one wanted to make a decision about them. The box was made of a dull gray material that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite stone, and it had arrived, according to the label, in November 1981. Someone had written on the label in faded ink, "Spontaneous transmission, unknown origin, possible echo of Avada," and then stopped, apparently deciding the rest wasn't their problem. Inside the box was something that looked, at first glance, like a soap bubble, iridescent, slightly wobbly, the size of a child's fist. But when Lyra reached for it with her gloved hand, it didn't pop. It felt, she noted later in her report, deliberate. Like it had been waiting. She set it in the viewing cradle, a shallow stone bowl used for memory analysis, and sat back. The image that emerged was of a cupboard interior. Small. Dark. A child's bare feet. The sounds of a house going on without him above. Lyra frowned and reached for the next box. There were 47 of them. Some were the same size as the first, some were smaller, denser, as though more had been compressed into them. They were spread across 6 years of misfiled archive boxes, each one labeled with some variation of unknown child, possible domestic incident, low priority, no wand signature detected, see also, spontaneous wandless, pre-Hogwarts. Each one had been looked at, there were review stamps on several of the outer boxes, and set aside, because without a wand signature there was no easy way to trace the caster, and without an easy way to trace the caster, it fell into the gap between being somebody's problem and nobody's. Lyra lined them all up on the viewing cradle table, oldest to newest. Then she watched them in order. By the 5th memory, her jaw was set. By the 12th, she'd stopped taking notes because her hands weren't quite steady. By the 23rd, she stood up and walked twice around the archive table and then sat back down and kept watching, because stopping felt worse than continuing. At the end of the 47th memory, Lyra Voss sat in the archive room for a long moment, very still, looking at the empty viewing cradle. Then she picked up her notes, walked out of the archive, up through the Department of Mysteries, past Cruz's office where she could hear him on the communication mirror, and directly to the door of the head of the DMLE. She knocked once. "Come." She opened the door. Amelia Bones looked up from her desk, a woman whose entire face communicated that she had been dealing with nonsense all day and was prepared to deal with more, and took in Lyra's expression, and something shifted in her own. "Shut the door," Amelia said. Lyra shut the door. "What have you got?" Lyra set her notes on the desk. 47 memory transmissions from an unknown magical child. Spontaneous wandless magic, consistent in character over a 6-year period, sent directly to the ministry without intervention or instruction. She paused. The memories document sustained abuse. Starvation, physical violence, deliberate psychological cruelty, systematic neglect. Another pause. The child is Harry Potter. I can prove it from the address visible in two of the memories. 14 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. That's the address on the guardianship placement filed by Albus Dumbledore on the 2nd of November, 1981. The room was very quiet for a moment. Amelia Bones took off her monocle, which she only did when something required her full, undivided, unbureaucratic attention. 6 years, she said. 6 years. And these have been in the archive since. The first one arrived in November 1981. Some of them were reviewed. Stamped low priority. Refiled. Lyra's voice stayed even. No action taken. Amelia put her monocle back on. Her expression had gone from tired to something much harder. How old is the boy now? He'll be 10 this July. Hogwarts letter next year. Right. Amelia stood up. Voss, you are not to discuss this with anyone in the department yet. No one. Not Cruz, not your cohort. Understood. Write up a full case summary. Everything. Chain of evidence, viewing dates, your analysis. I want it in quadruplicate and I want one copy in my personal safe. She was already reaching for her own memo paper. The other copies go to people I designate, not through the regular mail system. You're worried about it being buried. Amelia looked at her steadily. I'm worried about a great number of things, Voss. That's one of them. She began to write. Go. July was hot and relentless, and number 4, Privet Drive had the particular aggressive tidiness of a house whose owner treated the lawn as a moral statement. The roses were trimmed with surgical precision. The car in the driveway was washed every Saturday. The windows gleamed. From the street, it looked like the kind of house where nothing went wrong. Harry was pulling weeds at the side of the house when the summer really started. He was 10 years old, lean in the way children who don't always get enough to eat are lean, with dark hair that refused to behave regardless of what was done to it, and his mother's eyes, green and startlingly vivid against the July light. His glasses had been repaired with sellotape at the bridge 3 times and still sat slightly crooked on his face. He pulled weeds because it was a Saturday, and on Saturdays his list of chores started before breakfast and ended when Aunt Petunia ran out of tasks, which in Harry's experience had never actually happened. Pulling weeds was preferable to scrubbing the bathrooms, which was preferable to cleaning the gutters, which was categorically the worst because of what collected in gutters over a Surrey winter. He didn't think much about his situation in large terms. That was something adults did: frame things, contextualize, step back and say this is the overall shape of my life. Harry thought in specifics. The weed was stubborn, the root went deep, the soil was dry from the heat. The specific things he could do something about. The large shape he couldn't, so he didn't spend much time there. He was aware, in an oblique way, that he was different. Not from the Dursleys, that was so obvious as to be uninteresting. Different in some other way. Things happened around him that didn't happen around other people. He'd grown back a bad haircut overnight once. He'd ended up on the school roof when he was being chased by Dudley's gang, which had been both useful and inexplicable. A teacher at school had once told him he had a gift for analysis, which Harry had privately chalked up to the fact that when you were small and outnumbered and couldn't rely on adults to protect you, you got very good at reading situations fast. He also read constantly, because books were available at the school library, and the school library was the one place Dudley and his friends never went. He read everything: science, history, geography, fiction, the occasional collection of myths that Dudley would have mocked if he'd known Harry found them interesting. He'd read a book about memory, once, a science book aimed at secondary students, and found the description of implicit versus explicit memory startling in how well it described his own experience. He had an explicit memory of being small in the dark. He had an implicit memory of every trip wire in the Dursley house, every tone of voice, every silence, every specific configuration of a room that meant something bad was coming. He'd learned to read those configurations the way a meteorologist reads clouds. He pulled another weed. The root snapped. He dug around it with his fingers to get the rest. Inside the house, he could hear the television, Dudley watching something, Aunt Petunia's voice occasionally cutting in with a correction or an endearment. Uncle Vernon was at work. The street was quiet. Harry, for a moment, was alone, which was his preferred state. He didn't know that 3 days earlier, in London, Amelia Bones had stood in front of Cornelius Fudge's office and said, "Minister, we have a situation," and that the situation she described had made Cornelius Fudge go a color that wasn't quite white and wasn't quite green, but lived uncomfortably between them. He didn't know that a ministry investigation team had been quietly assembled, or that the investigation was labeled restricted classification, sealed, which meant it existed in only 6 people's files and nowhere else. He didn't know that Amelia had personally contacted Albus Dumbledore, that the conversation had been conducted entirely via encrypted mirror so that nothing existed in writing, and that Dumbledore had gone very still in the middle of it and said, in a voice that Amelia privately found more unsettling than shouting, "I see." He didn't know any of it. He pulled weeds and let himself think about the book on cosmology he'd read last week, the one with the chapter on how stars died, which he'd found not depressing but oddly comforting, the idea that even enormous things ended, and that ending was part of what made them matter. Albus Dumbledore sat in his office at Hogwarts and did not move for a long time after Amelia Bones's face disappeared from the mirror. The portraits around him made sounds, a snore here, a shuffling there, but no one spoke. Fawkes, his phoenix, was on his perch, watching Dumbledore with the specific patience that very old creatures have, the kind that doesn't rush toward comfort but doesn't withhold it either. The memories in Amelia's summary had been described to him, not shown. She hadn't allowed him to view them directly, protocol, she'd said, and she was right, and he knew she was right. But she had described them, each one, in clinical order, and Dumbledore had sat with each description and added the texture of imagination to it, the small room, the small boy, the particular domestic geography of cruelty. The thing was, and this was the part he found himself unable to stop thinking about, he had considered it. In 1981, placing Harry with Petunia and Vernon, he had considered what it might be like for the boy there. He had considered it and concluded that Lily's blood was worth the cost. That was what he'd told himself. Lily's blood, the wards, the protection, the necessity. He had used the word necessity and moved past the details because details were where doubt lived, and doubt was a luxury that people making large decisions couldn't afford. He had not checked. In 9 years, he had not gone to Privet Drive and knocked on the door and asked to see the boy. Minerva had done it once, the night he placed Harry there, and she had written to him afterward, that careful letter about peculiar neighbors and hoping he was right, and he had written back with confidence and warmth and certainty, and she had trusted him, and he had trusted himself, and neither of them had gone back. 47 memories. 6 years. And before that, 3 more years of ordinary childhood silence. He had made a decision that required a child to suffer, and he had told himself the child would not suffer too greatly, and he had not looked. Dumbledore stood up and walked to his window. The grounds of Hogwarts stretched below him, summer green, the lake catching afternoon light. He stood there a long time. When he finally moved, he went to his desk and wrote a letter to Minerva McGonagall. He did not explain everything in it. He said enough, and trusted that she would understand the rest, because she was clever and because she had always suspected, and because some truths land more fully when they arrive having been earned. The letter said, simply, "I was wrong, Minerva. I need you to come to my office." He folded it, addressed it, and gave it to one of the castle's resident owls. Then he sat back down, folded his hands, and waited for the reckoning with the quiet that he thought, perhaps, it deserved. The morning of August 3rd was overcast, and Harry was in the garden again, because he was always in the garden again, the garden being a task that could be given and given and given, when he heard a car he didn't recognize. Most of the cars on Privet Drive were known to him by sight. The neighbors were consistent in their automobiles. This one was dark blue and slightly too clean, pulled up against the curb at an angle that suggested the driver wasn't entirely familiar with the concept of parallel parking. 2 people got out. Harry looked at them the way he looked at everything, quickly, thoroughly, filing details with the unconscious efficiency of someone who'd learned early that information was the best thing you could carry when you didn't have much else. The first was a woman who looked somewhere in her mid-20s, dark-haired, sharp-featured, wearing a blazer over a dark shirt despite the heat. She moved like someone who was in a hurry but knew that rushing would give the wrong impression, so had forced herself to walk at a normal speed. She was carrying a slim leather folder. The second was a man in his 50s, sandy-haired and broad-shouldered, with the unhurried solidity of someone used to being the largest thing in a room. He wore a Ministry of Magic identification lanyard that he hadn't bothered to hide under his jacket. Harry noticed the lanyard immediately. Not because he knew what the Ministry of Magic was, but because it was a thing out of place on Privet Drive, and out-of-place things were always worth noting. The woman, Lyra Voss, though Harry didn't know her name yet, reached the gate of number 4 and paused. She looked at the house. Then her eyes moved to the garden, where Harry was crouching in the dirt, and she stopped moving entirely for a moment. She'd seen 47 memories of him. She knew him, in a way, knew the size of the cupboard he slept in, knew the sound of his voice at 6 years old when he asked, quietly, with a dignity that had made her chest hurt, whether there was any bread left. She was not prepared for him to be real, and present, and looking back at her with those green eyes that gave nothing away. Harry stood up slowly and wiped his hands on his jeans. He looked at both of them without speaking. Lyra opened the gate. "Is this the Dursley residence?" "Yes," Harry said. "Are Mr. and Mrs. Dursley at home?" Harry looked at her. Then at the identification lanyard. Then back at her. "Who's asking?" The corner of Lyra's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something acknowledging. "Lyra Voss, Ministry of Magic, Department of Mysteries. This is Investigator Doyle." She paused. "You're Harry Potter." "Most people call me Harry." "Harry, then." She held his gaze. "Is there an adult in the house?" "My aunt." "Could you tell her she has visitors?" Harry looked at them for one more moment, the lanyard, the leather folder, the particular quality of controlled purpose in Voss's expression, and something inside him did a slow, considered calculation. He didn't know what the ministry was. He didn't know why people from it would come to Privet Drive. But he knew authority when he saw it, and more usefully, he knew the difference between authority that was there for you and authority that was there at you. These two were not there at him. "Sure," he said, and went inside. He didn't listen at the door. He considered it, he was not above listening at doors, but something told him that whatever was happening in the sitting room was going to come to him eventually, and trying to catch pieces of it through 3 inches of wood seemed less useful than being somewhere Aunt Petunia couldn't shout at him to go away. He sat on the stairs, technically the hallway, technically not eavesdropping, and waited. He could hear Aunt Petunia's voice going through registers he recognized, the high bright social one she used for people she was trying to impress, which didn't last, followed by the thin uncertain one she used when something didn't follow the script she'd prepared, which also didn't last, followed by something lower, scraped out, which he'd never heard from her before. He could hear the man's voice, Doyle's, calm and even, saying things Harry couldn't make out. And then Voss's, clearer, more precise, and one phrase came through the door, "A legal matter, Mrs. Dursley, which means we need you to understand that you and your husband have rights in this process, and so does Harry." A silence. Then Aunt Petunia's voice, small in a way it never was, "He sent them here himself." Harry's head tilted. He didn't have the context to understand it. But he filed it, "He sent them here himself," because that phrase had weight in it, a weight that meant it explained something big, and he always remembered the things that explained something big. The sitting room door opened. Voss came out first and looked straight at him on the stairs, not startled, not pretending she hadn't known he was there. "Harry," she said. "I'd like to talk to you as well, if that's all right. We can sit in the kitchen. Or the garden, if you prefer." Harry looked at Aunt Petunia behind her. His aunt's face was a color he'd never seen on it. She looked older, somehow. Smaller. As if the house had expanded while she shrank. Garden, Harry said. She didn't hedge. He appreciated that later. In the moment he was too busy listening, but afterward he thought about the fact that she didn't talk to him like he was 5 or fragile or someone whose reality needed to be delivered in very small pieces with lots of pauses. She sat on the garden bench, him on the low stone wall opposite, and she told him the truth. Some of it he knew. He knew about the cupboard, obviously. He knew about meals, and chores, and the vocabulary the Dursleys used when referring to him. He knew about Dudley's fists and Vernon's hands and Petunia's particular talent for making absence feel deliberate. Some of it he didn't know. He didn't know that his magic had been doing anything. He didn't know that there was such a thing as the Ministry of Magic, or that it had a Department of Mysteries, or that inside the department someone had been sitting in an archive 6 years' worth of moments he'd thought were entirely private. He was quiet for most of it. When she finished, there was a pause. A crow landed on the fence at the end of the garden, looked at them both, and left. So my magic, Harry said. It recorded things. Yes. And sent them to you. To the Ministry. I found them in the archive. She paused. They'd been sitting there a long time. That's something I want to tell you plainly, Harry, because you deserve the plain version. They arrived and they were misfiled and no one acted on them. That was wrong. I'm sorry it took this long. Harry looked at his hands. He turned this over several times, the architecture of it, the mechanics. His magic, his own magic, reaching out while he slept or cried or simply endured, and screaming in the only direction it could think of. What happens now? He asked. There will be a formal investigation. A hearing in front of the Wisengamot, that's the wizarding court. Your aunt and uncle will have to answer for what's in those memories. She said it simply. Not with relish, not with the careful softening that would have made Harry feel managed. Just a fact. That process takes time. But there will also be an immediate change in your living situation. You shouldn't stay here, and we have, well, there are options. Where would I go? We're working on that. There are several families who've been vetted. There's also a possibility with Professor McGonagall. She's from Hogwarts, she's been involved in your case, and she's offered. She watched him. Nothing's been decided without consulting you. I wanted to make sure of that. Harry looked at the house. Through the kitchen window he could see Petunia standing at the counter, not doing anything, just standing, her back to them. He thought, with a clarity that surprised him, that he didn't feel what he might have expected to feel. Not triumph. Not grief. Something more like resolution. Like a sum that had been trying to come out right for years and finally had. This Hogwarts, he said. That's the school. That's the school. You'll have received a letter. Well, the letter is coming next July, when you turn 11. What kind of school? Magic. She said it plainly again. He was beginning to think that was simply how she operated. You're a wizard, Harry. A very unusual one, as it turns out, though I suspect you already knew you were unusual. I knew something, he said. He looked at the garden, the weeds he'd been pulling when they arrived, the roses he'd pruned last week and would be pruning again next week if nothing changed. He looked at it all without sentimentality. He'd never loved this garden. He'd only ever worked it. When can I leave? He asked. Lyra Voss looked at him, really looked, in the way most adults didn't bother to, and what she saw in his face made her reach across the space between them and rest her hand briefly on the stone wall, not touching him but near him, a gesture that was somehow both professional and entirely human. Soon, she said. Very soon. In London, in the Department of Mysteries, in Crew's office, a memo arrived from the DMLE that Crews read 3 times before standing up and walking to the window and looking out at the atrium far below with an expression that his colleagues, if they'd seen it, would not have recognized on him. It was the expression of someone confronting a truth they had technically known and practically ignored. In Hogwarts, Minerva McGonagall read Dumbledore's letter in her office, standing, because she couldn't sit for something like this. When she was finished, she set it down and put her hands flat on her desk and stood like that for a while, looking at nothing in particular, and then she put on her traveling cloak, walked to the fireplace, and went to Dumbledore's office, and did not say anything when she got there except, "Tell me all of it, Albus," in a voice that made it clear she would not accept anything less. And in a small garden on Privet Drive, Harry Potter sat on a low stone wall in the August heat and looked at the sky, which was still overcast, still grey, still promising rain that hadn't arrived yet, and felt, for the first time in his life, or at least the first time he could remember, that the sky went somewhere interesting if you followed it far enough. He was 10 years old. He was already, quietly and without fanfare, free. The rain came that night. It came the way Surrey rain often did, not dramatically but persistently, settling in as though it planned to stay. It washed the Privet Drive roses and the pristine Dursley driveway and the garden where Harry had been pulling weeds that afternoon. Harry lay in the cupboard under the stairs for what he already knew would be one of the last times and listened to it. He'd been told he could leave within the week. Lyra Voss had made a call from the Dursley sitting room, in front of Aunt Petunia, using a mirror that folded out of her jacket pocket, speaking to someone at the ministry in clipped efficient sentences. Vernon Dursley had come home from work halfway through it, had been informed of the situation by Investigator Doyle in the hallway, and had gone the color of old putty. He had not said a word to Harry all evening. That silence was different from the old kind. The old silence was loaded, pressurized, a thing that could shift at any moment into something worse. This one was just, empty. The silence of someone who had run out of ground to stand on. Harry pulled his blanket up. The rain kept going. He thought about the word she'd used, wizard. He turned it over like a stone, looking for what was underneath it. Not the word itself, the fact of it. The explanation for every inexplicable thing. The roof. The haircut. The strange running warmth he sometimes felt in his chest when something happened that shouldn't have been possible. And the recording. That was the part that kept circling back. He'd been crying in this cupboard at age 4, alone, in the dark, with nobody knowing and nobody coming, and some part of him had refused to let that be entirely true. Some part of him had reached out and insisted, without words, without direction, on being witnessed. He'd done it 47 times. He hadn't known. But some part of him had known. Harry closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, fell asleep without listening for footsteps. The rain kept going. The Dursley house sat in it, looking, from the street, exactly as it always had, tidy, ordinary, sealed. The impression it gave was no longer true. Chapter 2, The House of Cards. The letter came on a Tuesday, which felt wrong somehow. Tuesdays were for grocery runs and bin collection and the kind of tedious administrative reality that had no business intersecting with anything as consequential as what arrived at number 4, Privet Drive at 8:47 in the morning. Harry was washing up the breakfast dishes. This was still his job, would apparently remain his job until he physically left the house, when the owl hit the window. Not tapped. Hit. A large tawny owl with the officious bearing of something that took its work very seriously came out of the grey August sky and struck the kitchen window with its feet rather than its beak, which Harry gathered was the avian equivalent of an impatient knock. It had a letter in its talons and an expression that suggested it had places to be. Harry dried his hands and opened the window. The owl thrust the letter at him, waited precisely long enough for him to take it, then departed without ceremony back into the Surrey morning. Harry looked at the envelope. Heavy cream parchment, his name written in green ink with the kind of penmanship that suggested the writer had opinions about penmanship. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He looked at that for a moment. The cupboard under the stairs. Written right there on the envelope, official and plain, as though whoever sent it had always known exactly where he slept, which, given everything Lyra Voss had told him 4 days ago, was perhaps not as surprising as it would have been a week earlier. He opened it and read it at the kitchen counter, one ear on the hallway for footsteps that didn't come. Aunt Petunia had developed a new habit since Tuesday. She moved through the house as though she were trying not to disturb the air. Vernon hadn't been home from work before 9 all week. Dudley, who had not been told anything specific but had the animal sensitivity of a child who knows the ground has shifted, had stopped demanding Harry do things for him. The atmosphere in the house had changed in the way the air changes before a storm, charged, expectant, with none of the relief of rain. Harry read the letter twice. Then he put it in his pocket and went back to the dishes. He was a wizard. He already knew that. The letter confirmed what Voss had told him: Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, September 1st, the list of supplies. It used words like hereby and herewith and esteemed in the slightly overworked way that official things did when they wanted to convey importance. He found the supply list more interesting than the letter itself. 1 wand. 1 cauldron, pewter, standard size 2. 1 set of robes, black, dress. He was composing a mental list of questions: how one bought a wand, what standard size 2 meant for a cauldron, whether the robes had to be from somewhere specific, when the front door opened and the hallway filled with footsteps that were not Aunt Petunia's. 2 sets of them. One he recognized as Vernon's heavy deliberate tread, though it was only 9 in the morning on a weekday, which was wrong. The second was unfamiliar, lighter, more precise, someone who walked like they were perpetually aware of their surroundings. Harry came out of the kitchen. The woman standing in the hallway was not young, and was not trying to be, and had the kind of face that had earned every line on it in circumstances she'd found interesting rather than simply aging. She wore dark green robes over a white shirt, and her gray-streaked hair was pulled back severely enough to suggest she'd done it that way since before severity was fashionable and intended to keep doing it until it became fashionable again. Her eyes behind square spectacles were the sharp, saturated green-gray of early autumn. She was looking at Vernon Dursley with an expression that Harry could only describe as the visual equivalent of controlled detonation: everything contained, everything deliberate, and underneath it, something that could level a building if it were ever let out. Vernon Dursley, for his part, looked like a man who had arrived at his own house expecting it to be his castle and discovered it had been, without warning, converted into a courtroom. Professor McGonagall, Harry said, because he'd been told she might come, and because the robes were fairly indicative. She transferred her gaze to him immediately, and something in it shifted, not softened, exactly, but changed in quality, the way light changes when it moves from hitting something hard to hitting something it wants to illuminate. "Harry," she said. "It's good to finally meet you properly." A pause, brief and weighted. "Very good." Vernon stepped around her into the hallway, putting himself between them with the territorial instinct of someone who didn't quite have the leverage to back it up anymore. "Now see here, Mr. Dursley." McGonagall's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It had the carrying quality of voices that were used to rooms full of people who knew better than not to listen. "I am not here to have a discussion. I'm here to assist Harry in gathering his belongings, to answer any questions he has about the school year ahead, and to accompany him to his new accommodations. These are things I'm going to do. If you'd like to make tea while I do them, you may. If you'd like to stand in the hallway making objections, you may also do that, but I'll let you know in advance that I've been dealing with objections for 40 years and have yet to find them particularly useful." Vernon went the putty color. Harry had begun to think of this as the Dursley color, the particular shade of face went when it finally understood that the usual tools weren't going to work. Harry looked at McGonagall. "I don't have much," he said. "I'll be quick. Take your time." He went to the cupboard under the stairs and opened the door. He'd already packed, he'd done it yesterday, with the foreknowledge that this was coming, because packing in advance was both practical and a way of doing something when doing nothing felt unbearable. His things fit in a single backpack: 3 books from the school library that he planned to return at some point, a change of clothes, the Hogwarts letter, and a photograph of a woman with red hair and green eyes that he'd found once at the back of a kitchen drawer and kept, because no one had told him not to, and because she looked at the camera like the camera was a friend. He pulled the backpack out, slung it over one shoulder, and stood up straight in the doorway of the cupboard. He looked at the interior one last time: the sloping ceiling, the bare mattress, the single hook on the back wall he'd used for his school bag. He took an inventory without sentimentality. Then he turned around. Aunt Petunia was in the hallway. She'd come from somewhere, the kitchen, the sitting room, and was standing near the stairs in a dressing gown she hadn't bothered to change out of, her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were red at the edges, which Harry noted with the same clinical neutrality he noted most things about her. He wasn't sure what the tears were for. He didn't ask. McGonagall was watching Petunia with an expression that Harry would later come to understand was one of her most devastating. It contained neither hatred nor sympathy, but an absolute, clear-eyed recognition. The look of someone who sees a person entirely as they are. "He could have been your family," McGonagall said quietly. Not as an accusation, as a statement. As though she were reading aloud something from a document titled Facts That Will Follow You. Petunia said nothing. "Goodbye, Aunt Petunia," Harry said. He walked out the front door into the August morning without looking back. He heard McGonagall's footsteps follow, measured and unhurried, and then the door of number 4, Privet Drive clicked shut behind them, not slammed, just shut, the quiet sound of something ending, and Harry stood on the clean Dursley front step in the sunlight and breathed. The car waiting at the curb was not, as it turned out, an ordinary car. It looked ordinary, same dark blue ministry vehicle Lyra Voss had arrived in on Tuesday, but when Harry got in, he found it was considerably larger on the inside than the outside suggested it had any right to be, which he took in with a thoughtful tilt of his head and filed under apparently this is possible. Lyra Voss was already in it, in the front passenger seat, with a folder open across her knees. She turned when Harry got in. "Morning. Good sleep?" "Better than usual," Harry said honestly. McGonagall settled into the back beside him with the efficient economy of someone who sat in magical vehicles so routinely she'd long since stopped noticing them. "We'll be going to the ministry first," she said. "There are things to be signed, and some people who'd like to speak with you." She said this last part in a slightly different register, which Harry identified as the tone used when some people who'd like to speak with you was a diplomatic rendering of powerful individuals who will be assessing you. He filed this too. "What kind of things?" he asked. "Primarily guardianship documentation. The ministry needs to formally record a change in your living arrangements." McGonagall's hands folded in her lap. "There are options, as Miss Voss likely told you. You'll be informed of all of them and allowed to decide." "I've been told I'm going to stay with Professor McGonagall," Harry said. He looked at her. Was that wrong? McGonagall held his gaze. "It's one of the options." "Is it what you want?" She was quiet for a half-second longer than the question strictly required, which Harry noted. "Yes," she said, in a tone that indicated she didn't make offers she wasn't prepared to stand behind. "It is." "Right," Harry said. "Then that's what I'd like." He looked back out the window as London started to appear around them. "What are the other things?" Harry turned this over. "The headmaster." "Yes. Does he have to be there?" A pause. Lyra and McGonagall exchanged the kind of look that adults exchanged when a child asked a question they hadn't prepared an honest answer for. "He requested it," Lyra said carefully. "Whether you agree to it is, I'll see him," Harry said. "I've got questions." McGonagall's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, she was too experienced for surprise to show clearly, but something that might have been reassessment. "Of course." They drove on in comfortable silence. Harry watched London accumulate around them, the shift from suburbs to city, the buildings getting taller and more confident, the streets busier. He'd never been to London. He pressed nothing against the window, made no obvious show of interest, but his eyes moved constantly, catching things. The Ministry of Magic was not where Harry expected it to be, which was anywhere visible, because it was underground. They parked in a garage and were taken through a service entrance, then down in a lift that Harry counted, 9 floors, each one announced by a cool female voice enumerating departments he filed away for later consideration. Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Department of Mysteries. The atrium was enormous and gold and busy in the specific way of bureaucratic spaces, people moving with the purposeful velocity of those who have meetings, carrying scrolls and folders, and in one case a cage containing something that appeared to be a ball of concentrated smoke with opinions. People looked at Harry. He'd expected this, vaguely, based on what Voss had told him, that he was apparently famous in this world for something that had happened when he was a baby. What he hadn't expected was the specific quality of the looking. It wasn't casual celebrity recognition. It was more complicated than that. Some faces showed something that looked like relief, some showed what he could only describe as grief, some just went still in the particular way of people who are confronting something they thought was abstract and have just discovered it is concrete. He walked through it at a steady pace and didn't perform anything, not humility, not ease, not the wide-eyed bewilderment people might have expected from a 10-year-old entering this world for the first time. He just looked at things because they were interesting, and followed McGonagall and Voss because they knew where they were going. A small knot of people near the lift dispersed hastily as they passed. One woman, middle-aged, in ministry robes, started to reach toward Harry and then pulled her hand back when she caught something in his expression, though Harry hadn't consciously arranged his expression at all. "They thought you were dead," Lyra said quietly, falling into step beside him. "Or, not dead, but gone. Hidden somewhere safe. They didn't know what Dumbledore had arranged. And now they do. The investigation isn't public yet. But word gets around in small communities." She glanced at him. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Harry said. He meant it. They were shown into a conference room on level 2 that was trying to look reassuring, comfortable chairs, no visible instruments of anything, and largely succeeded, except for the cluster of people already in it who had the contained energy of individuals sitting still because they'd decided to rather than because they felt like it. Amelia Bones was at the head of the table. Harry recognized her from Voss's description, the monocle, the bearing of someone who processed nonsense as a professional hazard. Beside her was a man in plum-colored robes who radiated the particular anxiety of someone representing the minister's office without being quite senior enough to be comfortable about it. Two other ministry officials Harry didn't recognize sat to one side with quills and parchment. And at the far end of the table, slightly apart from the others, not arranged apart, not placed there by protocol, but simply having settled at a distance that was entirely characteristic of someone who understood the value of space, was Albus Dumbledore. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore looked back. He was everything Harry would have imagined from a story, if he'd known enough to imagine a story, very tall, very old, silver-haired and silver-bearded, with half-moon spectacles and robes of deep midnight blue. He held himself with the easy authority of someone who had been the most accomplished person in every room he'd entered for a very long time. But his eyes, and Harry was good at eyes, had trained himself to be, because eyes were where people hid the things they didn't want to say, were doing something that the rest of his presentation wasn't. They were looking at Harry with something raw in them. Not guilt, exactly, guilt tended to look away. This looked at him, steadily, the way someone looks when they've decided that the least they can do is not flinch. Harry pulled out a chair and sat down. McGonagall sat on his left. Voss took the seat to his right without appearing to think about it, which Harry noticed. "Harry," Amelia Bones said. "I'm Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Thank you for coming in." "Thank you for the room," Harry said politely. Something in Bones's expression shifted into what might have been, in a different context, amusement. "We'll be covering several things today. Guardianship arrangements, the formal transfer of care. An overview of the investigation timeline. And there are some questions the ministry has, though I want to be clear that you are under no legal obligation to answer them today or at all." "I don't mind questions," Harry said. The man in plum robes leaned forward with the slightly excessive eagerness of someone trying to demonstrate relevance. "Harry, I'm Perkins, deputy to the minister. The minister wants to personally express, does the minister want to express it himself?" Harry asked. Perkins blinked. He's occupied today, but right, Harry said, and that was clearly the end of that, because even Perkins seemed to sense that whatever he said next was going to make things worse. Dumbledore made a sound that might have been a cough. The guardianship documentation was straightforward. Minerva McGonagall was to serve as Harry's legal guardian for all ministry purposes. She had a house in Edinburgh and a set of rooms at Hogwarts that would serve as Harry's term-time residence. Harry read everything he was given to sign, which he'd learned from the science books was important, and signed it. McGonagall countersigned. Bones witnessed. It took 12 minutes. Then Bones set down her quill and folded her hands. Harry. I'd like to explain what happens next in the investigation, and I'd like you to hear it directly rather than having it relayed. I appreciate that, Harry said. The memories your magic sent to the Ministry over the years, the 47 transmissions Miss Voss catalogued, will be presented as evidence before the Wisindamat in a formal hearing. Your aunt and uncle will be formally charged under both Muggle and Wizarding law, since the crimes occurred in a Muggle household but involve a registered magical minor. The hearing won't happen immediately, these things take time to prepare properly. But it will happen. I want you to know that. I believe you, Harry said. You don't have to testify, Bones said. The memories speak for themselves. I know. Harry looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up. I'd like to, anyway. When the time comes. He said it without bravado, just a simple statement of preference, the way he said most things. I was there. I should be. Bones looked at him. We'll cross that when we come to it. A pause. Is there anything you want to know? About the process, about the charges, about anything? Harry thought about this. He had a lot of questions, but he was aware that this was a finite meeting with finite purpose, and he'd learned to separate the questions that needed to be answered right now from the questions that could wait for less official circumstances. He picked the one that felt most important. The memories, he said. The ones my magic sent. Can I see them? Silence. You haven't seen them? Bones asked. I was there, Harry said. So I know what happened. But I'd like to see what my magic decided to record. What it thought mattered. He paused. It made choices about what to send. I'm interested in what it chose. Voss was looking at him. McGonagall was looking at the table. The quality of the room had changed, not uncomfortable, exactly, but the way air in a small space changes when something real has been said in it. That can be arranged, Bones said, after a moment. Not today. But yes. Harry nodded. Thank you. Then he turned to look at Dumbledore, who had been silent through all of this, conspicuously, deliberately, holding silence the way someone holds still in a room where sudden movement might startle something. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. Harry, Dumbledore said. His voice was warm, still. Warm in the way of something that had always been warm and couldn't change that even under pressure. I've got some questions for you. Of course. No hesitation. I would expect nothing less. The blood wards, Harry said. Lyra explained them to me. You put me there because of Lily's, because of my mum's blood in Aunt Petunia. For protection. Against Voldemort. A slight intake of breath from the man in plum robes at the name, which Harry noted and disregarded. That is correct, Dumbledore said. Did the wards require me to be mistreated? No. Quiet. Certain. They required you to be present in that house. Nothing more. So what happened was, unnecessary, Dumbledore said. Just that word. He didn't reach for anything else, didn't elaborate or contextualize. It was unnecessary, Harry, and I did not prevent it because I did not look. I made an assumption about what was happening at Privet Drive, and I did not go back and verify it, and that was a failure on my part for which I do not intend to offer you an explanation dressed as an excuse. The room was very still. Harry studied him for a long moment. Reading him the way he read rooms and faces and the specific configurations of atmosphere that told you what was really happening underneath the visible surface. What he found in Dumbledore's expression was not performance. It was the particular exhaustion of someone who had been honest with themselves, possibly for the first time in a while, and found the honesty not comfortable but necessary. "All right," Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. "I beg your pardon." "I'm not saying it's fine," Harry said. "It's not. But I'm also not. I don't want to spend my time being angry at you when there are more useful things to do. So." He spread his hands slightly, a small, practical gesture. "We've said what needed to be said. I'd like to go forward." McGonagall was looking at Harry with an expression he couldn't quite classify. Voss had her pen down. Even Bones, who had probably thought she was beyond being surprised by anything, had her monocle slightly askew. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter, this 10-year-old boy with his crooked glasses and his mother's eyes and his extraordinary, matter-of-fact composure, and something moved across his face that was too genuine to be catalogued. "I think," Dumbledore said, with the careful precision of a man choosing his words because they mattered, "that you are going to be very important, Harry." "I already am," Harry said, without arrogance, without vanity, just as a simple fact. "I'd just like to start being important on my own terms." The rest of the morning passed in the way that official things pass, forms, explanations, a brief unpleasant interlude with Perkins from the minister's office that Amelia Bones ended by simply looking at him, and by noon Harry was standing in the ministry atrium with McGonagall and Voss and a folder under his arm containing his copies of the relevant documents, which he planned to read thoroughly. "We can go to Diagon Alley now, if you'd like," McGonagall said. "For your school supplies." "It needn't be today if you'd rather rest." "I'd like to go today," Harry said. "I thought you might." Voss touched Harry's arm briefly. "I'll be in touch, Harry. If anything comes up with the investigation, you'll hear from me first, not through an official letter, directly from me." "All right." "Thank you," Harry said. "For finding the memories. For not just filing them back." She held his gaze. "I should have found them sooner." "You weren't there sooner," Harry said reasonably. "That's different." She looked at him the same way McGonagall had in the conference room, that look that kept appearing on adults' faces around him, the one he was starting to identify as the look of someone recalibrating their expectations. He didn't mind it. He just didn't think he was particularly remarkable. He thought he was just paying attention. Voss left with her folder and her leather jacket and her purposeful stride toward the lifts, and Harry turned to McGonagall. "How do we get to Diagon Alley from here?" "Flo network," she said. "Have you ever traveled by Flo?" "No." "Then let me explain it," she said, and there was something in her voice that was different from the official register she'd used in the conference room, something more settled, more personal, more like the beginning of something rather than the conclusion of it. She sounded, Harry thought, like someone who had just received permission to teach, which was clearly what she actually was, and was relieved to be back to it. He followed her toward the fireplaces along the atrium wall. The atrium was still busy, still full of people doing ministry things with ministry briskness. Harry moved through it as he'd moved through the morning, attentively, without performance, cataloguing and considering. He was a wizard. He had a school to go to, an investigator who was fighting for him, a guardian who had chosen to be one. He was going somewhere called Diagon Alley to buy a wand. He didn't let himself feel it all at once. That was a skill too, knowing which feelings to let in when. Some of them needed to wait until he was somewhere quiet and could give them the space they deserved. What he did let himself feel, walking through the gold-lit ministry atrium, was something small and certain and clean. It felt a lot like the beginning of something. Which it was. Diagon Alley hit him like a wave of sound and color and smell, bread and something chemical and something else that was entirely magical and didn't have an analog in the world he'd come from. People shouted prices, owls called, a cart piled with cauldrons went clattering past and narrowly missed a witch in extraordinary pink robes who appeared to be engaged in an argument with a hat that was arguing back. Harry stood at the entrance and looked at all of it. McGonagall stood beside him. She didn't say anything, didn't try to prepare or narrate. She just waited. "Right," Harry said, after a moment. "Where first?" "Gringotts," she said. "Your family has a vault. We'll need to access it to pay for your supplies." He hadn't quite absorbed this before. Your family has a vault, and it landed differently now that they were here, standing at the top of Diagon Alley with the white marble bulk of Gringotts visible at the far end. His family. His parents. A vault. "Lead the way," he said. Gringotts was staffed by goblins, which Harry added to his list of things that were apparently real. They were brisk, professional, and radiated the particular authority of beings who had decided long ago that they were going to be excellent at their jobs and found human discomfort at this fact entirely uninteresting. Harry found them refreshing. The vault, his parents' vault, a vault that had been sitting under this bank for a decade collecting whatever it collected, was reached by a cart that plunged through underground tunnels at a speed that Harry thought was probably unnecessary but appreciated on the grounds that unnecessary speed was at least interesting. It opened to reveal a room stacked with gold coins, and Harry stood in the doorway of it for a moment and did his best to be practical. He took what he needed. He didn't count it obsessively or marvel at it at length. He put the coins in the pouch the goblin provided, shook the goblin's hand because it seemed right, and went back to the surface. "You're taking this rather well," McGonagall observed, as they emerged into the alley. "How would you like me to take it?" "I don't have a preference. I'm simply noting it." Harry looked at her. "I spent 10 years in a cupboard knowing something was wrong with my life but not what. Finding out it's all true, that it's not just in my head, that's actually easier than the alternative." McGonagall was quiet for a beat. "Yes," she said, in the tone of someone who hadn't considered that particular angle and was finding it clarifying. "I suppose it would be." They bought robes first, a shop where the tailor was a woman who took one look at Harry's dimensions, one look at his face, and measured him with the focused respect of a professional who knew exactly what she was dealing with. Then textbooks, from a shop that smelled like old paper and was staffed by a man who became visibly enthused when Harry showed genuine interest in the titles, asking questions about the advanced transfiguration text that McGonagall had suggested he might find interesting alongside the standard first-year reading. He did find it interesting. He bought it. The wand was last. Ollivander's looked slightly precarious from the outside, its sign old enough to have opinions, and inside was narrow and tower-tall and smelled like cedar and something sharp Harry couldn't identify. Ollivander himself emerged from somewhere in the depths of the shop like a fact coming to the surface, small, pale-eyed, moving with the careful certainty of someone who measured the world in very precise increments. He looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter," he said, in a voice like old wood. "I wondered when we'd meet. Did you know my parents?" Harry asked. "I sold your mother her wand. 10¼ inches, willow, swishy. Excellent for charms work." A pause. "And your father?" 11 inches, mahogany, pliable. Good for transfiguration." He tilted his head. "I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. I remember what happened to most of them too." His eyes moved across Harry's face with the intensity of someone reading very small text. "Let's find yours." The process was what the process was. Harry tried wand after wand after wand in the peculiar trial and error of wand lore, while Ollivander moved through his shop with increasing interest that Harry gathered was genuine because it didn't seem performed. He muttered things as he went: 10 inches, vine, no, obviously not, try this, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, give it a wave. The holly wand felt like coming home to somewhere he'd never been. The warmth went up his arm like a handshake. The air moved, the dust shifted, and Harry stood with his wand hand extended and thought, "There you are." Ollivander was looking at him with an expression that was 2 parts professional satisfaction and 1 part something much more private. "Curious," he said. "You've said that already," Harry said. "And I'll likely say it again before we're done." He boxed the wand with practiced care. Holly and phoenix feather. 11 inches. The phoenix who gave the feather for your wand gave only one other. His brother Wand, Mr. Potter, gave you that scar. Harry received this information. He didn't perform shock or dread. He felt something, not nothing, but something contained, a note he would return to later when he had quiet and space for it. That's something to know, he said. Indeed. Ollivander handed him the box. Take good care of it. I find it's almost always the wand that cares for the wizard, but wizards who bother to return the favor generally fare better. I'll remember that, Harry said. They paid and left, and Diagon Alley continued around them, loud and extraordinary and entirely indifferent to the fact that a small boy with a new wand had just had a very large day. Harry walked through it beside McGonagall, carrying his shopping, watching everything, letting the sensory rush of it move past him while he sorted through the day's important pieces. The wand. The vault. The ministry hearing, still ahead. The Wisengamot. His name on the conference room agenda, his name in Vassa's folder, his name on the guardianship papers. His name, everywhere, attached to a story he'd had no say in. He was starting to understand that the most important thing he was going to do in the next year was not defeat anything or protect anything or live up to anything. The most important thing was simply to figure out who Harry was, underneath all the things his name had been made to carry. That felt, strangely, like the most interesting problem he'd ever been given. McGonagall was watching him with peripheral attention. She had the ability to supervise without appearing to supervise, which Harry recognized as a genuine skill. Are you hungry? She asked. Starving, he said honestly, because there hadn't been much breakfast in the Dursley kitchen this morning, and the morning had been rather full since. There's a cafe at the end of the alley that does an excellent pasty, she said. We can go over your book list and I'll tell you something about what to expect from the school year. Harry looked up at her. The afternoon light caught the silver in her hair, the precise lines of her face. She'd been so careful with him all day, not hovering, not smothering, not over-explaining. Just there. The way a person was there when they decided to actually be present rather than simply performing presence. That sounds good, he said. She nodded, something in her expression settling into a quiet satisfaction that she didn't draw attention to. They walked to the end of the alley while the wizarding world went on around them, and neither of them said anything else for a moment because nothing else needed to be said, and that was, Harry thought, a very good sign. Vernon Dursley came home that evening to a house that had 2 fewer people in it than he was used to, though only one of those people had actually left. He stood in the hallway and looked at the closed cupboard door and the fact that it was just a door now, not a door and whatever it had meant for a decade to be a door that led to a small room where a child slept. He didn't go near it. He went to the sitting room and turned on the television. Petunia brought him his dinner without being asked. Dudley was somewhere upstairs. The house was the same house it had always been, same carpets, same lampshades, same defensive tidiness in every corner, but it felt different in the way a theater feels different when the performance has stopped. Like the architecture had been bearing the weight of something and didn't know what to do now that the weight was gone. Vernon ate his dinner and watched the news and thought about the letter that had arrived this morning from a wizarding solicitor he hadn't known existed until last Tuesday. He thought about the Wisengamot, which Dursley had had to have spelled for him by the ministry woman, Doyle, who had spelled it with the careful patience of a man who found something profoundly uncomfortable about the whole situation. He thought about 47 memories played in a viewing cradle before a courtroom full of wizards. He turned the television up. In a house in Edinburgh, a 10-year-old boy sat in a clean room with a window that actually looked at the sky, and read his Transfiguration textbook until he fell asleep with it open across his chest, and slept deeply and dreamlessly, with all the purposeful unconsciousness of someone who had somewhere to be in the morning and fully intended to be there. Chapter 3, What the Vault Knows. Edinburgh in late August had a quality of light that Harry didn't have a word for yet, something to do with the angle of it, the way it came low and gold through McGonagall's sitting room windows in the mornings and made everything look like it was already history, already worth remembering. He'd been in the house on Canongate for 3 weeks and he still stopped sometimes in the doorway of the kitchen just to watch the morning come in. McGonagall's house was narrow and tall, sandwiched between its neighbors like a book between bookends, and inside it was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 40 years teaching and had opinions about the right way to do everything. The bookshelves were organized by subject, then author, then date. Harry had checked. The kitchen had a board where she wrote the week's meals in her precise hand. The sitting room had 2 chairs that had clearly been in those positions for long enough to have worn slight impressions in the rug, and a fireplace that connected to the Fleur network and coughed green sparks whenever anyone used it within a 50-mile radius. Harry had his own room on the 3rd floor. It had a window seat. He spent a considerable amount of time in it. He was there on the last Tuesday of August, his Transfiguration textbook open on his knee and a second book, a history of the wizarding world that he'd picked up at Flourish and Blots without telling McGonagall, because it had seemed relevant and he didn't need permission to buy books, propped against the window frame. He was reading both simultaneously in the manner of someone whose brain found a single thread of information insufficiently demanding. Downstairs, the Fleur coughed. Harry marked his pages and listened. He could hear McGonagall's voice. She'd expected a visitor, she'd mentioned it that morning without details, which meant she either didn't think the details were important or had decided to let them emerge naturally. He gathered his books into a stack and went downstairs. Lyra Voss was standing in the sitting room, looking slightly ash-smudged at the shoulders in the way of everyone who used the Fleur and hadn't entirely mastered the art of arriving without incident. She was in the same leather jacket she'd worn to Privet Drive, which Harry was starting to think might just be what she looked like. She had a satchel with her. It was heavier than her usual folder. "Morning," Harry said, from the doorway. "Morning." She looked at him. "You look better." "I was fine before." "You look better, though." He supposed she wasn't wrong. 3 weeks of meals at a table, a bed with actual sheets, and access to as many books as he could carry had an observable effect on a person. He came into the room and sat down in one of the chairs. "What's in the bag?" "That's what I came to talk to you about." She looked at McGonagall, who had taken her customary position in the other chair. "I've gotten clearance from Bones for Harry to view the transmissions. The memories." She set the satchel down. "I want to be clear that it's not required. You can review them now, later, or not at all." "But you said you wanted to." "I did," Harry said. "Right." She reached into the satchel and produced something that Harry recognized, a shallow stone bowl with etchings around the rim. A portable viewing cradle. And then, carefully, a series of small sealed containers, glass, each one labeled with a date in Lyra's handwriting. She lined them up on the coffee table. 47 of them. Harry looked at the row of them. Oldest to newest, just as Lyra had described. He did a quick calculation, the first dated November 1981, the most recent July 1990. "They're already in order," Lyra said. "You can go through as many or as few as you want. I'll be here the whole time. You can stop whenever." "You keep saying that." "I'm going to keep meaning it." Harry looked at the first container. November 1981. He'd been a year old. This wasn't the first memory, it was the first transmission, meaning whatever his magic had done, it had apparently started a year after. No, wait. He frowned. He looked at the dates again more carefully. "The first one's from 1981, he said. "I was only a year old in November 1981. "Yes," Lyra said. "But you told me the first time I was 4. A pause. Lyra and McGonagall exchanged a look. "The first transmission you're remembering me describing was the first one I told you about in the garden," Lyra said carefully. "The first one I told you was significant was from when you were 4. She hesitated. "There are some from earlier. From the first year." Harry looked at her steadily. "What are those ones?" "They're different from the others. Less about incident. More about." She seemed to be choosing her words. There's one of your mother. The sitting room went quiet. The Edinburgh morning moved outside the window, unhurried. Put that one in first, Harry said. Harry, please, he said. Not fragile, just clear about what he wanted. Lyra picked up the November 1981 container, opened it, and set the contents, that same iridescent bubble, smaller than the others, into the viewing cradle. The image bloomed upward from the bowl-like steam, but solid, dimensional, impossibly detailed. Sound came with it, ambient, the way memory sound always is, present and slightly distant at once. A woman with red hair was sitting on the floor of a small room with yellow curtains. She was younger than Harry's photograph of her, the laugh lines less set, the energy in her face less finished somehow, more kinetic. She was making something hover above her open palm. A small paper bird, folded with clear origami precision, turning slow circles in the air above her hand. She was talking to someone off the edge of the visible frame, adult voice, too deep for the memory to have been made from Harry's infant height. James, presumably. She was laughing about something, the laugh trailing off into words Harry couldn't quite catch. And then she turned her head, because someone had made a sound from the direction of the memory's origin point, and her face came fully into view, and she was looking directly at Harry, at the him who wasn't there, at the transmission point, at whatever his one-year-old magic had done out of pure instinct, and her expression was just love. Not performed, not arranged. The entirely unself-conscious version, the way faces look when they don't know anyone's watching. Hey, you, she said softly. Apparently to him. What are you looking at? The memory ended. Harry sat very still. He was aware of McGonagall beside him and Lyra across from him, both of them giving him the particular quality of attention that meant they were watching without making him feel watched, which was a difficult balance, and they were both managing it. He was also aware that his throat had done something complicated and his vision was slightly blurred, which was information he noted and sat with. She knew I was recording, he said. We think so, Lyra said quietly. We think she felt the magic doing it. She was apparently a very gifted witch. Yes, Harry said. She was. He looked at the empty viewing cradle. Let's keep going. It took 2 hours. They watched all 47. Lyra had been worried, going in, about what it would do to him. She'd sat in this room in her head several times since she'd gotten clearance, running scenarios, thinking about what she'd say if he broke down or shut down or needed to stop. She had resources. She'd looked up what the research said about trauma and witnessing and the secondary experience of one's own history. What she had not prepared for was Harry watching his own memories with the focused, analytical attention of a researcher. He didn't watch passively. He watched the way he apparently did everything, actively, cataloging, occasionally making small sounds of recognition or assessment. Twice he asked her to rewind, using the reset point on the cradle. Once he asked her what the date on a particular memory corresponded to in terms of what else had been happening, and McGonagall had answered in a careful voice that on that date, Harry had started at the local school, and Petunia had evidently resented the expense. He was quiet through the worst ones. Not withdrawn, just, inward. Present but processing. The ones involving Vernon's hands. The ones involving being locked in for days at a time. The ones from when he was very small that mostly showed the interior of a dark space from a very low angle, which were in some ways worse than the incident-specific memories. When it was over, he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. My magic chose specific things, he said. Yes, Lyra said. It didn't record everything. I know things that happen that aren't there. He was thinking aloud, she realized, not performing, not making conversation. Actually thinking. It recorded the things that were, I think it recorded the things I felt most strongly. The incidents and the patterns. He paused. It knew what would matter in court. It didn't record me sitting in the cupboard being bored. It recorded me sitting in the cupboard the night Vernon hit me. It knew what evidence looked like. Children's accidental magic is almost always emotional in origin, McGonagall said. It responds to what the child feels most intensely. So my magic essentially built a legal case, Harry said, over 6 years, starting when I was a year old. That's one way to describe it, Lyra said. It's a good way to describe it. He looked at the row of now empty containers on the table. Can I ask you something that might sound strange? Please, Lyra said. Do you think it knew what it was doing? The question hung in the room. What do you mean? Lyra asked carefully. I mean, magic isn't random. I've read enough to know that. Accidental magic is emotional, but it's also purposeful. It does things. It doesn't just happen at nothing. He tapped one finger on the arm of his chair, thinking. Mine specifically recorded. Specifically sent. To an authority. Not to a neighbor, not into the street, not just outward in general. It went to the ministry. He looked at her. I was a year old. I didn't know the ministry existed. But my magic did. How? The room was quiet for a moment. McGonagall set down her tea. Magic has its own, it isn't precisely intelligence, she said slowly, choosing carefully. But it has affinities. Purpose. It moves toward what's needed. And what you needed, was a witness, Harry said. Yes. He looked at his hands. I used to think there was something wrong with me, he said. Not dramatically, I didn't lie awake miserable about it. It was just a background fact, the way the Dursleys presented it. That I was wrong. Deficient somehow. He said this the same way he said everything, plainly, without making it a performance. Watching those memories, seeing what I actually was, what was actually happening, it's not what I expected to feel. What did you expect? McGonagall asked. I don't know. Something worse, maybe. He shrugged slightly. Mostly I feel, correct. Like the facts have been arranged properly. Like I was always the same person and now I just know it on more than a gut level. A pause. I'm also extremely angry, but that feels separate. Those can coexist, Lyra said. I know. He looked up. The hearing. When is it, roughly? October, if Bones's timeline holds. She's been driving it hard. Good. He gathered the empty containers into a careful stack and handed them back to Lyra. He did it with the particular tidiness of someone for whom order was partly practical and partly something else, a small daily assertion of control over his environment, she thought. Thank you for coming, he said. And for getting the clearance. Of course. You didn't have to do that. You'd already done the important part, you found them. Nobody asked you to bring them here and sit through 2 hours of, Harry, she said. It wasn't a hardship. He looked at her. Something in his expression acknowledged this, and moved past it, and settled. I know, he said. I just wanted to say it anyway. September 1st arrived with the particular chaos of any major departure, trunks, owls borrowed from McGonagall's colleague, lists checked and rechecked, and McGonagall herself moving through the house at a pace that suggested she was managing her own feelings about the day by expressing them as logistics. Harry watched her from the kitchen table, eating his breakfast with an appreciation for actual eggs that hadn't faded in 3 weeks. She'd been up before him, which meant she'd been up early, which meant she hadn't slept well, which she'd never say and he'd never ask about directly. The trunk is packed, he said. I know. I checked it. So did I. Then we agree. She poured tea without sitting down. Platform 9 3/4 is accessed through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. You run at it. You run at a wall. Yes. Right, Harry said mildly. That seems like information you'd want to have in advance. Which is why I'm telling you in advance. She looked at him over her tea. You'll be all right. I know. He finished his eggs. Are you going to be all right? She made a sound that wasn't quite dismissive and wasn't quite fond, somewhere in the middle range. I'll be at the school before the train arrives. That's not what I asked. She set down her tea and looked at him with the expression she used when something had surprised her and she was deciding whether to show it. Then she said, I will be considerably better once you are inside the school and I can stop imagining everything that might go wrong between here and there. Nothing will go wrong, Harry said. You don't know that. No, he agreed. But I'm not worried. I'm aware that you're not worried. I find this simultaneously reassuring and deeply irritating. Harry's mouth curved. He'd been doing that more often lately, not the full grin that he suspected had been waiting somewhere for a more hospitable environment, but the smaller version, the one that was mostly in the eyes. McGonagall had looked slightly startled the first time she'd seen it. He thought she was getting used to it. King's Cross was everything a major London train station was, loud, crowded, smelling of exhaust and overpriced coffee, and absolutely indifferent to the fact that several hundred children were about to walk through a solid wall to get to a magic school. Harry arrived with enough time to watch the barrier for a moment before committing to it. He saw a family first, red-haired, loud, numerous, a mother herding children and a trolley and arguing good-naturedly with what appeared to be twins who were pretending to be confused about where the barrier was. He watched the eldest of the red-headed group disappear into the barrier with the casual ease of someone who'd done it many times, and then the twins, and then stood and watched the barrier for another moment. All right, he said to himself. Not nervousness. Just precision, the way you stood at the edge of anything and confirmed that you were actually going to do it before you did. He pushed the trolley forward and ran. The barrier wasn't solid. There was a half-second of pressure and then he was through, and platform 9 3/4 opened around him like a world that had been folded very small and was now unfolding in a hurry. The scarlet steam engine at the platform was extraordinary, enormous and genuinely red, breathing steam into the September morning with the self-possession of a thing that understood its own scale. The platform was full of children and parents and owls and cats and the particular ambient joy of people who belonged here. Harry stood at the barrier entrance for a moment and just looked at it. He had expected it to feel like stepping into something alien. Instead it felt like, he turned the word over, recognition. Like his body knew this even though his brain didn't, yet. Like the magic in his hands recognized the magic in the air and said, yes, we're home. He found a compartment toward the middle of the train, stowed his trunk, and sat down with his Transfiguration textbook. He'd already read most of it, but he was rereading it with the marginalia he'd added on the first pass, which made it a different experience. 20 minutes before departure, a boy with red hair knocked on the compartment door and stuck his head in. He had a smudge of something on his nose and the open, instinctive friendliness of someone who'd grown up in a house where being friendly was the default. Anyone sitting here? Everywhere else is full, well, nearly full, there might be other compartments, I haven't checked them all but, sit down, Harry said. The boy sat. He had an owl with him in a cage, a battered old thing that appeared to be made of someone else's old things, and the specifically comfortable relationship with the world of someone who'd never had less than they needed, even if they'd never had more than enough. I'm Ron, he said. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Ron's eyes went wide. He looked at Harry's forehead, the scar, partially visible under his fringe, and then, to his credit, looked back at Harry's eyes and made an obvious effort to treat this as a normal piece of information. Right. Brilliant. I mean, sorry, I knew you were going to Hogwarts, everyone knows, my mum mentioned it, he stopped. Reconsidered. My whole family went to Hogwarts. I'm the 6th. My brother Charlie just graduated. Big family, Harry said. 7 of us, yeah. Gets a bit, there's a lot going on, always. He said this without complaint, more like someone reporting a fact they found fundamentally interesting. That your Transfiguration book? We haven't started those yet. I started early. My mum tried to get me to do that. I made it about 3 pages. He looked at the cover with something between guilt and admiration. Is it interesting? Genuinely yes, Harry said. The chapter on molecular transposition is wrong in the way it explains the mechanism, but the practical applications are accurate. Ron stared at him. You're going to be something, aren't you? Probably, Harry said. Ron considered this, then grinned, the broad, unguarded grin of someone whose face was built for it. My brother Fred says first year is brilliant because no one knows yet who's good at what. Then it sorts itself out by second year and it's all, oh, that's the one who's good at charms and so on. So first year is when you can try things without anyone deciding who you are. I already know who I am, Harry said. Then that's even better. Ron pulled out a paper bag. Want a pasty? My mum packed about 10. Harry did want a pasty. He said so. They talked for a while in the easy way of two people who turned out to fit together conversationally, the pauses comfortable, the changes of subject natural. Ron told him about Hogwarts with the inherited authority of someone who'd been hearing about it his whole life, the castle, the moving staircases, the ghosts, the 4 houses and the sorting. He talked about his brothers, Fred and George's particular genius for chaos, Percy's particular genius for taking things seriously, Charlie who loved dragons and Bill who was something called a curse breaker in Egypt. What house do you think you'll be in? Harry asked. Gryffindor, obviously. All the Weasleys are. What about you? Harry had read about the houses. He'd been thinking about the question since he'd read about them. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't think it'll matter much. Ron looked slightly scandalized by this casual position on something he clearly held strong opinions about, but before he could respond, the compartment door slid open. A girl stood in the doorway. She had a lot of curly brown hair and the manner of someone who had organized their morning precisely but was prepared to adapt if required. She looked at both of them with a rapid, thorough assessment. Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost his, I've been helping him look. No toad, Harry said. Right. She didn't leave. She was looking at Harry with the expression of someone who has recognized a name and is deciding how to handle that recognition. He'd gotten familiar with that expression. He waited. You're Harry Potter, she said. Yes. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you. That must have been strange, Harry said. Reading about a person who didn't know you existed. She paused. Recalibrated. A bit, yes. She stepped fully into the compartment. May I sit? Only Neville found his toad, Trevor, it was under the seat the whole time, and I'd rather not go back to the compartment with the boy who spent the last hour trying to show me a card trick that didn't work. Please, Harry said. She sat down across from him and looked at his textbook. Her face lit up with the specific joy of encountering someone else who had read the thing. You've got the Transfiguration text already. He read it, Ron said, in the tone of someone reporting a mild natural phenomenon. He thinks the chapter on molecular transposition is wrong. The mechanism explanation is completely wrong, Hermione said immediately. I wrote a note about it in my margin. The correct explanation is actually in the 4th-year text, which I also brought because I thought, well, I didn't know what the standard would be. What 4th-year text? Harry said. She reached into her bag. Ron looked between them. I feel like I'm at a disadvantage here, he said cheerfully, and took another pasty. The train arrived at Hogsmeade Station in the dark, which was clearly the point, the visual effect of the 1,000 candles in the Great Hall landing harder on children who'd come through darkness and lake and night. Harry crossed the lake in a boat with Hermione and Ron and a round-faced boy named Neville who was clutching his toad with the determination of someone who'd learned a hard lesson about putting it down. The castle materialized above them on the cliff and Harry looked at it the way he'd looked at most things today, straight on, without flinching. It was very large. It was also, unmistakably, alive in some way that had nothing to do with its inhabitants. The magic in the walls was old enough to have a quality of its own, like the low frequency of a sound just below hearing that you felt in your chest. "All right?" Hermione said, from beside him. "Very all right," Harry said. The sorting was in the great hall, which lived up to its name. For long tables of students, the floating candles, the ceiling that showed the night sky above, and a battered hat on a stool that turned out to be remarkably theatrical for an item of headgear. It sang a song about the houses. Harry listened to it with genuine attention. McGonagall was at the staff table. She caught his eye for a moment, brief, professional, but underneath it something that acknowledged the strangeness and significance of seeing him here. He acknowledged it back, equally briefly. He was watching the staff table with some attention. He'd read about the faculty, done the mental cross-referencing, McGonagall, transfiguration. Flitwick, charms, very small, apparently delighted to be alive. Sprout, herbology. Quirrell at the defense against the dark arts position, who was wearing a purple turban and radiating a nervous energy that Harry found interesting in the way that something slightly wrong-shaped was interesting. And at the center, Dumbledore, who met Harry's eyes across the length of the hall and who held the look for one measured moment before inclining his head slightly, a bow, almost. Not patronizing. Genuine. Harry inclined his head back. At the end of the table, Professor Snape was watching this exchange with an expression that Harry couldn't immediately classify. Dark-robed, dark-haired, pale, with the kind of face that had decided on its default expression early in life and committed to it. He had the controlled stillness of someone with very strong feelings that he kept on an extremely tight leash. When Snape's gaze moved to Harry, his expression shifted, so briefly it was almost nothing. A flash of something complex and private that Harry registered and filed for later. "Potter, Harry," McGonagall called. Harry walked to the stool, sat down, picked up the hat, put it on. The hat spoke into his head immediately, which was startling in the specific way of things that you were told to expect and still weren't quite ready for. "Well," it said. "You're an interesting one. People keep saying that. They're not wrong. A sensation like something sorting through a library, pulling out books and putting them back. You've had an unusual preparation for this school, Mr. Potter. Not just the last 3 weeks of actually being taught, the years before. You were alone a great deal. Yes. Alone children think differently. They build the world inside before they get to experience it outside." Another pause, longer. Significant bravery. Considerable intelligence. A strategic mind that you don't show off because you learned that showing off was dangerous. Loyalty that goes deep, you feel things deeply, you simply don't perform them. The hat seemed to settle. "I know where I want to put you. But I want to ask you something first." "Go ahead. Is there anywhere you don't want to go?" Harry thought about this genuinely. He considered Slytherin, which valued ambition, he had that. Ravenclaw, which valued knowledge, he had that too. Hufflepuff, which valued loyalty and hard work, both true. Gryffindor, which valued courage, yes, though he didn't think of courage as a personality trait so much as a decision made repeatedly. "No," he said honestly. "Put me where I'll be most useful." The hat made a sound that might, in a hat, have been laughter. "I haven't been asked that before." A final pause, brief. "Gryffindor." The table on the left erupted. Harry walked to it, sat down next to a fifth year who immediately tried to shake his hand, and looked back at the staff table. Snape was still watching him. The expression still unclassifiable, but Harry added a data point. Snape had expected something from the sorting, and whatever it was, he might not have gotten it. The turban-wearing Quirrell was looking at Harry with something Harry didn't like, not as clear as hostility, more obscured than that. An interest that had layers to it. Harry made a note. Ron was sorted into Gryffindor minutes later, arriving at the table with relief written all over his face, and Hermione followed, the hat barely touching her head before calling Gryffindor with an enthusiasm that startled her enough to grab at it with both hands before she remembered where she was. She sat down across from Harry and Ron. Well, she said. Good. Very, Harry said. The feast appeared on the tables with a thoroughness that would have been remarkable to Harry even 3 weeks ago and was, even now, something he let himself appreciate. He ate like someone who'd learned to take good meals seriously when they were available, and listened to the table's overlapping conversations, and watched the hall. He was watching Quirrell again. Something about the man bothered him in a way he couldn't yet articulate, like a math problem where the answer kept coming out wrong despite correct steps. What are you looking at? Ron asked, following his gaze. Quirrell, Harry said quietly. Ron looked. He was normal last year, Percy said. Went off traveling over summer and came back weird. Fred and George reckon he met a vampire. What do you think? Harry asked. Ron considered this with surprising seriousness. I think he's scared of something. People who've met vampires are usually just annoyed. Harry looked at Ron. That's actually a very good distinction. Ron looked pleased. I have moments. Across the table, Hermione was watching Harry watch Quirrell and making her own notes in the private ledger of her attention. She didn't say anything yet. She was new here and she was being careful about certainty, and she was also, it had to be said, still adjusting to the fact that the most interesting person she'd encountered at this school so far had found her interesting back. This was not a thing that happened often to Hermione Granger, and she was processing it with appropriate thoroughness. Dumbledore's welcome speech was warm and slightly eccentric and contained several aphorisms that Harry suspected were designed to sound wise while actually doing the work of establishing that this was a school with a specific personality. He listened, and when Dumbledore made a brief announcement about the third-floor corridor, forbidden, mortal danger, do not go there, Harry's attention sharpened in the particular way of someone who has just been told where the most interesting thing in the building is. He didn't say this out loud. He made a note. After the feast, in the corridor outside the Great Hall, moving with the Gryffindor first-years toward wherever Gryffindor Tower turned out to be, Harry walked slightly apart from the main group, which he always did, and heard his name. Not called, said. Behind him, in a low voice, by someone who'd positioned themselves to speak to him as he passed. He stopped and turned. Snape was standing at the edge of the corridor, robes entirely in keeping with the stone walls around him. He looked at Harry with that complex, layered expression. Up close it didn't simplify. It just revealed more layers. Potter, he said. Professor Snape, Harry said. They regarded each other. You have your mother's eyes, Snape said. It was said without effect, not cruelly, not warmly. It had the quality of something being put down after being carried for a long time. I know, Harry said. I have a photograph. Something in Snape's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Your head of house will have told you that potions requires academic rigor and consistent effort. She told me you don't tolerate nonsense, Harry said. Which seems reasonable. A pause. Indeed. Snape looked at him for one more moment, then turned away into the shadows with the ease of someone who spent a lot of time in them. I'll be watching your progress with interest, Potter. The standard here is high. Good, Harry said. I'd be bored otherwise. Snape paused mid-step. Didn't turn back. Continued on. Harry rejoined his housemates moving toward Gryffindor Tower, his mind working through several things at once, Quirrell's layered fear. Snape's layered feelings about his mother. Dumbledore's forbidden corridor announcement delivered with the precision of a man who wanted it to be remembered. The castle moved around him, the staircases that shifted, the portraits that spoke, the torches that burned without being lit. It was enormous and alive and had clearly been waiting for something to do. You've got that look again, Hermione said, falling into step beside him. What look? The one where you're computing something. She said it matter-of-factly. What is it? Harry glanced at her. 3 hours on a train had established that Hermione Granger was someone he didn't have to perform intelligence for. She'd know if he was being general on purpose, and she'd find it interesting rather than threatening if he wasn't. Quirrell, he said. And the third-floor corridor. I noticed Quirrell too, she said immediately. And the announcement was oddly specific for a general prohibition. Right. So there's something up there. Something the school is protecting, Harry said. And Dumbledore wants the students to know not to go near it, but he delivered the warning in exactly the way you deliver a warning if you expected some of us to ignore it. Hermione considered this. You think that's intentional? I think Dumbledore is extremely smart and extremely deliberate, Harry said. I don't think he does anything by accident, including announcing things in Great Hall speeches. Hermione was quiet for a moment. That's either reassuring or alarming. Probably both, Harry said. Ron appeared on Harry's other side, slightly breathless from arguing with a portrait. Why are you both so serious? We just had a brilliant feast. We were discussing Quirrell and the third-floor corridor, Hermione said. Oh, obviously Quirrell's hiding something, Ron said cheerfully. And obviously the corridor thing is basically an invitation. But I'm going to enjoy the first week before worrying about it. He looked at Harry. Are you going to worry about it before the first week? I'm not worrying, Harry said. I'm paying attention. There's a difference. Okay, but you're making the worried face. I don't have a worried face. You absolutely have a worried face. It's your thinking face but with more, Ron gestured vaguely at his own forehead. Hermione was looking between them. This is going to be a very efficient friendship group, she said, mostly to herself. The fat lady's portrait swung open ahead of them, and Gryffindor Tower revealed itself, and Harry walked into it, and it smelled like old wood and warm stone and something faintly like home. Not the home he'd had. The one he was going to build. Late that night, long after the dormitory had quieted into the specific breathing of 5 11-year-old boys who'd had a very large day, Harry lay in his proper bed, actual sheets, the stars visible through the tower window, and thought about what his magic had done. It had started sending memories when he was 1 year old. The very first one, the soap bubble in the grey box, had been his mother's face. Not an incident. Not evidence of harm. Just her, the paper bird, the laugh, the look she'd given directly to the impossible small camera of his infant awareness. His magic had sent that one first. He'd been thinking about why since the viewing session in Edinburgh, and he thought he had it now, in the quiet of the dormitory. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't incidental. It was establishing context. It was saying, before you see what was done to him, know what was taken from him. Know who he came from. Know what love looks like, so you understand what absence of it looks like. His magic, at age 1, had made an argument. Harry stared at the ceiling of Gryffindor Tower and felt something warm move through his chest, not pride, exactly. More like recognition. More like, there you are. The stars outside the window were very clear. The castle breathed around him. He fell asleep thinking about the third floor, and Quirrell's eyes, and the way Dumbledore had said mortal danger with the calibrated weight of a man setting a stage. He slept, this time, with the dreams of someone who had somewhere interesting to go in the morning. Chapter 4, The shape of a name. The first week at Hogwarts had a rhythm to it, not the tight, anxious rhythm of having to learn the rules before you broke them, but something more like the rhythm of a piece of music you'd never heard before and were already beginning to understand intuitively after the first few bars. Harry moved through it with the attention of someone who'd spent 10 years reading everything he could get his hands on, and found that being prepared was not the same as being unsurprised. The castle surprised him constantly. He liked it. Transfiguration was first on Monday, which meant McGonagall, which meant Harry arrived at her classroom 3 minutes early, sat in the second row, front row was performative, back row was evasive, second row was correct, and had his textbook open to the chapter they'd be covering. She entered through the classroom door in her exact green robes, looked at the class assembling with the brisk assessment of someone conducting a rapid quality audit, and her eyes passed over Harry with the same assessment she gave everyone else, which he appreciated. No favoritism. No acknowledgement. Just a professor who had certain expectations and was about to make them clear. Then a cat jumped off the desk where it had been sitting, and became McGonagall, which caused the girl beside Hermione to make a noise like a kettle, and half the class to rear back, and Ron to say something under his breath that was fortunately lost in the general commotion. Harry watched the transformation with pure scientific interest. His margins were already filling up. Transfiguration, McGonagall said, is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at this school. Anyone who treats it as anything less than the precise discipline it is will be asked to leave and will not be asked to return. She looked at them over her spectacles. That said, if you bring the appropriate respect for it, you will find it extraordinarily rewarding. She set a match on each desk. Into a needle, she said. The methodology is on page 12. You have the rest of the class. Harry looked at the match. He read page 12, which he'd already read, but read it again because the context of actually doing it added information. He turned the problem in his mind, not the practical problem, not his fingers or his wand, but the conceptual problem, the thing underneath the technique. What was a match that wasn't a match? What was a needle that wasn't yet a needle? He thought about what he'd thought about the previous chapter, about molecular transposition. He thought about how transformation worked not as an imposition of new form but as a persuasion of existing form. The match didn't stop being the match, it was convinced to be something the match already had the potential to be. He held the thought clearly, raised his wand, and the match became a needle with a sound like a quiet inhale, perfectly formed, gleaming silver on the desk in front of him. Hermione looked up from her own match, which was partially through its transformation, silver at one end and still wood at the other, excellent for 2 minutes in, and stared at Harry's needle. You did the whole thing, she said. The conceptual framing in page 12 is slightly off, Harry said quietly. If you think about it as persuasion rather than replacement, the process is smoother. Hermione looked at her half-match. Then she changed her approach. Her needle materialized 30 seconds later, entire and sharp. She wrote something in her margin that Harry thought was probably persuasion not replacement and then looked at him with the expression of someone who had just reclassified someone from interesting to actually important. McGonagall came past their row. She looked at Harry's needle, then at Hermione's, then made a mark in her register that she didn't explain and moved on without speaking. Harry understood. This was a professional relationship with established terms. In the classroom, she was his professor. What happened outside the classroom was separate. He respected the distinction completely. Defense against the dark arts was Tuesday afternoon, which meant Quirrell, which meant Harry sat at the back specifically so he could watch rather than be watched. Quirrell smelled strange. Harry noticed this immediately and couldn't not notice it for the rest of the lesson, something under the obvious scent of the purple turban's garlic wrapping, something darker, earthier, almost chemical. Like something preserved in something else. The class was on dark creatures, specifically how to identify them, which was an appropriate first-year topic. Quirrell taught it in the register of someone who'd learned to be nervous in front of groups and hadn't entirely unlearned it, lots of stuttering, lots of tangential clarifications, a general air of a man managing something. But twice during the lesson he forgot to stutter. Harry caught both instances. Once when he was describing the capabilities of a particular creature, his voice went clean and authoritative for almost 4 full words before the stutter reasserted itself. Once when he turned toward the blackboard and a student knocked something over, his reaction was sharp, contained, entirely not consistent with someone genuinely nervous. Ron, sitting beside Harry, was taking decent notes in the uncomplicated manner of someone taking notes because they needed to rather than because the act of note-taking was itself interesting. Harry's own notes were almost nothing about the dark creatures and almost entirely about Quirrell. After class, walking across the courtyard in the September sun, Hermione fell into step beside him and said, without preamble, "He forgets to stutter." "Yes," Harry said. "And the smell is wrong. You caught that too. It's like garlic but underneath it there's something." She searched for the word. "Dead," she said, not with drama, just precisely. "Not rotting. Preserved. Like a museum." Ron had caught up with them. "We're not doing the third-floor corridor conversation yet," he said, pointing at Harry. "We've been here 4 days." "We're doing the Quirrell conversation," Harry said. "That's different," Hermione said. Ron looked between them. "Is it?" "The corridor is a destination," Harry said. "Quirrell is already in the room with us twice a week." Ron thought about this and conceded with a gesture. "Fine. What about Quirrell?" "Something happened to him over the summer," Harry said. "Something that changed him. His colleagues noticed, Percy mentioned it last year, and the staff table reaction to him is uncomfortable if you're watching for it. He came back from traveling different." "Fred and George's vampire theory," Ron said. "Not a vampire," Hermione said firmly. "No," Harry agreed. "Something else." He paused. They'd reached the stone steps up to the main entrance. Harry stopped and let the other students flow past them and up. "I want to know what's on the third floor." "Obviously," Ron said. "Not to go looking immediately," Harry said. "To understand what Quirrell's interest in it is. Because he has one. I watched him during Dumbledore's announcement at the feast and he went still in a way that wasn't surprise, it was recognition." Hermione absorbed this. "So you think Quirrell knows what's up there?" "I think Quirrell has a relationship with what's up there," Harry said, which was more precise. "Brilliant," Ron said, in the tone of someone who was half genuinely enthusiastic and half wondering how he'd ended up in this conversation before the end of his first week. "So what do we do?" "Library," Harry and Hermione said, simultaneously. Ron looked at the sky. "Obviously the library." The library became their primary territory in the way that territories are established, not through declaration but through repeated presence until the space simply associated with you. Madame Pants identified Harry in the first week as someone who treated books with appropriate respect, which was her primary criterion for human worth, and thereafter regarded his increasingly specific research requests with professional satisfaction. They were looking for the third-floor corridor obliquely, any reference in Hogwarts history to the school storing something significant, any pattern of protection that might indicate a notable object had been secured. Harry pulled books on the history of the castle, Hermione went after the catalogue of notable wizarding artifacts, and Ron, because he had the specific genius for apparently random connection that highly organized people tended to miss, started in on a collection of wizarding newspaper archives the library kept bound in the back corner. "Look at this," Ron said, on the third night of research, dropping a bound volume open on the table with a thump that made Madame Pants glance over with a reflexive librarian scowl. He pointed at a small article from July. Harry read it. A Gringotts vault had been broken into on July 31st, the same day Harry had gone to the bank with McGonagall. The article noted it was remarkable primarily because the vault had been emptied earlier the same day, before the break-in occurred. Whatever had been there was already gone. "Someone was after something at Gringotts," Harry said. "And someone beat them to it," Hermione said, leaning in. "And now it's at Hogwarts." "The timing is right," Harry said. July 31st. That's when Hagrid, Dumbledore's man, cleared the vault. And by September the third floor is suddenly off limits. "So whatever's in Gringotts Vault 713, Ron said, checking the article, is now in the third-floor corridor." "Not in the corridor," Harry said. "The corridor is the approach. Whatever's protecting it is in the corridor." "You got all that from a newspaper article and 3 days of library research," Ron said. "And from watching Quirrell," Hermione said. "And Dumbledore." She tapped her quill against her chin. "What was in Vault 713? "Gringotts don't disclose that," Harry said. "But we can look at what would require that level of protection. And who would try to steal it?" He didn't say the name. He'd been thinking about it since Ollivanders, the wand that had given his wand's twin, the name that made grown wizards flinch. The presence that had apparently tried to kill him at age 1 and hadn't been seen clearly since. He thought about it with the analytical distance of someone who decided that fear was only useful as information, not as weather. You're thinking about Voldemort, Hermione said. Ron hissed in a breath. Several nearby students glanced over. Yes, Harry said. You could say, Ron started. His name is a word, Harry said, looking at Ron with calm directness. It means nothing except what people decide it means. The man himself is the problem, not the arrangement of sounds that refers to him. Ron opened his mouth, closed it, and looked thoughtful in the specific way of someone who had held a received belief and just had it turned over cleanly. When you say it like that, he said. He's not dead, Harry said. Whatever happened the night he tried to kill me, he wasn't destroyed. He's somewhere. He looked back at the newspaper article. And if he's been gone for 10 years and now something powerful enough to interest him has turned up in a school he can probably access through a compromised professor, he paused. Then we have a timeline problem. Hermione was very still. Compromised, she said. You're saying Quirrell. I'm saying it's worth considering. She sat back. She processed things in a manner that Harry had identified as thorough and rapid in equal measure. She didn't jump to conclusions, but she also didn't refuse conclusions when the evidence pointed at them. All right, she said, in the tone of someone who'd made a decision. What do we do with this? First, we find out everything we can about what would require that level of protection, what objects, what significance. Second, we watch Quirrell without making it obvious we're watching. Third, Harry stopped. Third. Ron said. Third, I'm going to talk to Dumbledore. You're just going to walk up to the headmaster and tell him you think his defense professor is working for Voldemort? Ron said. Not yet. I'm going to talk to him about something else and see what he chooses to tell me. That's, Hermione started. Very Slytherin, Ron said, impressed despite himself. No, Harry said. It's just reading the room. Dumbledore's office door opened before Harry could knock. He'd come after dinner, having sent a note via one of the Castle Owls requesting a conversation, which had received a reply in a flowing hand saying of course, Harry, 8 o'clock, gargoyle on the 3rd landing, password is lemon drop. Harry had folded the note into his pocket and gone. He was operating on the principle that the most direct path to information was usually also the most direct path to the person who had it. The office was exactly what a headmaster's office should be, circular, tall, full of portraits and silver instruments and the organized clutter of a life spent thinking. Fawkes was on his perch, the Phoenix looked at Harry with that old, patient intensity, and Dumbledore was at his desk in robes of deep blue, a cup of tea at his right hand and the expression of someone who had been thinking about this conversation and was genuinely interested in how it would go. Harry, he said. Sit down, please. Tea. Thank you, Harry said. He sat in the chair across the desk and accepted the cup, which was an excellent move when dealing with powerful people because it established equality of posture without requiring it to be named. Dumbledore waited, giving Harry the conversational lead, which was either courtesy or assessment. Harry thought it was both. I wanted to ask you about the night my parents died, Harry said. Something moved in Dumbledore's eyes. Not pain, he'd had years with this. Something more like readiness. Of course, he said. Not the whole story. I've read the general account. He'd read everything the library had on it, and Lyra Voss had filled in several gaps, and McGonagall had given him what she knew without being asked. I want to know specifically about Voldemort. Where he went. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you don't say his name with any difficulty. It's his name, Harry said. Where did he go? Dumbledore turned his teacup once in its saucer. That is something even I don't know fully. He lost his physical form when the killing curse rebounded. He didn't die, I suspect he had made provisions against death, though I don't know their full nature yet. He went, somewhere. Diminished. Not destroyed. A pause. Why are you asking this now? I'm asking it now because I'm at the school where you've apparently stored something significant enough that someone tried to steal it from Gringotts in July, and because my defense professor started the year afraid of something and the fear has specific characteristics. The office was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment with those old, evaluating eyes. Not uncomfortable, not defensive. More like someone confirming a hypothesis they'd been privately running. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been paying attention," Harry said. "There's a difference." The corner of Dumbledore's mouth shifted. "Indeed." He set down his teacup. "You are correct that something is being kept here. I won't tell you what it is yet, not because I intend to keep it from you permanently, but because I believe the right time for that information is not quite yet here." He held Harry's gaze steadily. "I will tell you that the protections are substantial. And that I am aware of the risk Professor Quirrell may represent." "Then why is he here?" "Several reasons. The most important is that I prefer to know where a threat is." Harry absorbed this. "And you didn't remove the object somewhere safer because there is nowhere safer than here," Dumbledore said simply. "And because the person who seeks it will find it regardless of where I put it, if I am not careful about how it's guarded." "You set a trap," Harry said. "I set a contingency," Dumbledore said. "Which is different." "Is it?" A pause. A genuine one, the kind that meant Dumbledore was actually considering the question. "It may not be," he allowed. "I'll think about that." He folded his hands. "Harry. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that any answer you give is acceptable." "Go ahead. What do you intend to do with what you've worked out?" Harry looked at him. "I intend to understand it," he said. "I intend to be ready for whatever follows. I don't intend to walk into the third-floor corridor for the entertainment of it." He paused. "And I intend to keep talking to you, if you're willing. Because you know more than I do, and I know some things you might not, and that seems like a situation where conversation is more useful than distance." The silence that followed was warm rather than heavy. "I think," Dumbledore said, "that is the most sensible thing anyone has proposed to me in quite some time." He picked up his tea again. "The Wisengamot hearing has been set for October 17th, he added, in a different register. Quieter. "Amelia Bones confirmed it this morning." Harry was still. "Right. I'll be there," Dumbledore said. "Not as a witness, I haven't been asked to. But I will be present." He paused. "I thought you should know that." Harry thought about what that meant. What Dumbledore being there would mean, the acknowledgement it represented, the weight of the most powerful wizard in Britain sitting in a room where Harry's history was being examined and not trying to manage or minimize it. "Thank you," Harry said. "It is the least I can do." He said it without drama, as a precise statement of fact. "Quite literally, Harry, the least." Harry finished his tea. Stood. "Can I come back? When I have more questions?" "My door is open to you," Dumbledore said. "I mean that without qualification." Harry left. He walked back through the castle feeling the weight of several things shifting and resettling. The conversation had given him more than he'd come in for, not just information, but a clearer picture of how Dumbledore actually worked. He was brilliant, and he was careful, and he had made the error of caring about outcomes so much that he'd been too detached from the processes that produced them. He was trying, now, to be different. Harry didn't know if the trying would hold, but he respected the attempt and intended to hold it accountable. The castle moved around him as he walked, a staircase shifted, and he shifted with it, adapting his route without irritation. He was beginning to understand the castle's logic, the way its changes weren't random but responsive, the way the building seemed to route people where they needed to go as much as where they intended. He passed the third-floor corridor. He didn't stop. He noted it, noted the door at the far end, noted the quality of the silence coming from behind it, not empty, occupied, and kept walking. Not yet, he thought. Not yet. The owls came Saturday morning. Harry was at breakfast when the mail arrived, the great roof opening and 50 owls descending in the organized chaos of a postal system that relied on birds having opinions, and he saw the ministry seal from across the table before the owl had fully landed. Lyra's handwriting on the envelope. He opened it and read it while Ron and Hermione were occupied arguing about something in their history of magic notes, Ron claiming the textbook was wrong about a particular goblin rebellion, Hermione saying he was misreading the date, and the argument was good cover for the stillness that came over Harry while he read. The hearing date was confirmed. October 17th. Harry was not required to testify in person but was invited to submit a written statement, which the Wisengamot would consider alongside the memory evidence. The Dursleys had been served formal charges. Vernon had engaged a solicitor. Petunia had, according to the note, initially tried to engage a solicitor and then discharged him and said she intended to speak for herself, which Lyra noted with the careful neutrality of someone who found this development interesting and wasn't sure what to do with that yet. At the bottom of the letter, below the official information, Lyra had written in a different pen, slightly smaller, "You don't have to write anything if you don't want to. I just want you to know the option is there. I'll be in touch before the 17th. LV." Harry folded the letter and put it in his inside pocket. "Everything all right?" Hermione asked, from across the argument, which had apparently resolved itself while he wasn't paying attention. "Hearing date confirmed," Harry said. Both of them went quiet. Ron, to his credit, didn't ask what hearing, having been told enough in the first week that he had context even if he didn't have details. October 17th, Harry said. "I'm going to write a statement. Do you want help?" Hermione asked. He looked at her. "With the writing itself, no. I know what I want to say." He paused. "But I might want someone to read the final version." "Of course," she said, in the tone of someone accepting a genuine responsibility rather than performing willingness. Ron put a piece of toast on Harry's plate without commenting on it, which Harry thought was probably the most purely kind thing anyone had done for him all week. He wrote the statement on Sunday night, in the common room after everyone else had gone to bed. He'd thought it would be harder. He'd thought there might be some version of the thing that happened when you had to translate sustained experience into language, the inadequacy of words for what had actually been, the way description always fell short of reality. But he'd watched his own memories in Edinburgh. He'd seen, from the outside, what his magic had chosen to record. And he found that he had, after 10 years and 3 weeks of considerable recontextualization, a very clear idea of what he wanted to say. He didn't write about specific incidents. The memories did that work. He wrote about patterns. He wrote about the way the absence of ordinary things, a birthday, a kind word, a name said without contempt, accumulated into something that had its own weight. He wrote about the cupboard under the stairs not as a dramatic detail but as a logistical fact, a choice that was made every day for 9 years, a choice that required consistent effort to maintain, that required active work to keep him there and keep him small. He wrote, "I am not asking the Wisengamot to be angry on my behalf. I am asking them to be precise. What happened in that house was not the result of neglect or thoughtlessness. It was a system. Systems require participation. Every person who participated in that system made choices, consistently, over years. I would like those choices to be recognized as what they were." He put the quill down and read it back. Then he made 2 small changes, a word in the 3rd paragraph, a sentence in the 5th that was doing the same work as the one before it, and folded it. Hermione read it at breakfast Monday morning. She was done in 4 minutes, which Harry knew meant she'd read it twice. She handed it back. "You know what the most powerful thing in this is?" she said. "The precision," Harry said. "The lack of anger in the language," she said. "You're furious, I can tell from knowing you even just 2 weeks. But the statement reads like you're describing events in a history book. That's going to be devastating." Harry considered this. "Good," he said. He sent the letter to Lyra that afternoon. She responded the following morning with 2 words, "Received." Perfect. 2 weeks before the hearing, Harry was coming back from Quidditch trials. Wood had spotted him in the air during a flying lesson the previous week and all but physically carried him to the pitch for a tryout, and Harry had flown with the same instinctive competence he brought to most things, and been installed as the youngest seeker in a century with the kind of certainty Wood reserved for good fortune and perfect weather, when he walked past the staff room and heard voices. Or more precisely, heard one voice, then another, then silence, then the first voice again. He would have walked past. He was not in the habit of eavesdropping on staff rooms. That was a different calculation from listening at a sitting room door in a house where information was the only protection available. He would have walked past. Except the first voice was Quirrell, and Quirrell's voice had the quality it sometimes did in class when the stutter dropped, clear, adult, authoritative in a way that had nothing to do with Quirrell and felt borrowed from somewhere else. And the second voice made every hair on Harry's arm stand up. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even fully a voice, more like the memory of a voice, the echo of something that used to occupy a body and hadn't fully adjusted to the change. It said something Harry couldn't make out, and then Quirrell responded, louder, more distressed, not ready, I need more time to, the protections are too many, someone would notice, the other voice again. Low. Patient. Inexorable. Harry moved away from the door before he heard more, because he had enough, and because standing at a staff room door when whatever was behind it finished its conversation was not a situation with good outcomes. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower at a steady pace, went up to the dormitory, and sat on his bed. Confirmed, then. Not a theory anymore. Not a pattern to watch for. He sat with it for a moment. The voice, that sound, that wrong presence, had been something he'd understood in his body before his mind caught up. Something his magic recognized in the way his magic apparently recognized a great many things before he consciously did. He thought about what Dumbledore had said, I prefer to know where a threat is. He thought about what he'd said in return, you set a trap. He thought about the stone. The thing in Vault 713, now behind the third-floor door, behind whatever protections Dumbledore had constructed. He thought about Quirrell saying the protections are too many. Too many for now, Harry thought. Which meant the timeline was longer than it might have been. Which meant there was time. Not unlimited time, but time enough to be smart rather than reactive. He pulled out a piece of parchment. Made notes. The what, the who, the approximate when. He cross-referenced what he knew about the Gringotts break-in and what he'd gathered about the third floor's geography and what Dumbledore had and hadn't said in his office. Then he wrote a second note, short, to Dumbledore. I have new information relevant to our previous conversation. When can we meet? He sent it with a school owl. The response came before dinner, tomorrow morning. Bring Miss Granger and Mr. Weasley if you trust them. A.D. Harry read the note twice. Then he went downstairs where Ron and Hermione were doing homework at the table nearest the fire. Dumbledore wants to meet with us tomorrow morning, he said. Ron looked up from his charms essay. All three of us? All three of us. Ron put his quill down slowly, with the deliberation of someone who decided he was going to be all the way in on something and was marking the moment. Right, he said. What do I need to know before then? Everything I know, Harry said. He sat down. Which is a lot. So let's start. Hermione was already reaching for fresh parchment. Outside, the Scottish evening was coming down hard and dark and cold, the kind of October dark that felt like preparation rather than simple absence of light. Inside Gryffindor Tower the fire was very bright, and 3 children sat around a table doing what children who were paying attention had always done, building their understanding into something that might, when the time came, be enough. Harry's quill moved steadily across the parchment. The castle breathed around them. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, behind a locked door, something waited. He wasn't ready for it yet. He intended to be. Chapter 5. The weight of watching Dumbledore's office at 7 in the morning had a different quality than it did at 8 in the evening. Less theatrical, more working. The silver instruments on their shelves were doing quiet things that Harry found he wanted to examine more closely, and Fawkes was eating what appeared to be a breakfast of small flames, which he took from a dish with the delicate precision of someone who enjoyed their morning routine. Dumbledore was at his desk with 2 letters open in front of him and a third being written. He waved them in without looking up, finished the sentence he was writing, set the quill down, and looked at all 3 of them with the warm, evaluating attention that Harry had decided was just how he looked at people, thoroughly, as though he were confirming they were still who he'd last assessed them to be. "Sit down, please," he said. "All of you." They sat. Harry had briefed Ron and Hermione the previous night with sufficient detail that both of them had come prepared, Hermione with a notebook already tabbed, Ron with the expression of someone who had slept on information and woken up with the uncomfortable conviction that it was serious. Harry said, simply, "Voldemort is in the school." The office didn't react. Dumbledore didn't react. He'd either already known or had suspected with enough certainty that confirmation didn't require visible response. He folded his hands. "Tell me what you heard," he said. Harry told him. The staff room corridor, the timing, the specific content of what Quirrell had said, and the voice he'd heard beneath it, the description of which he kept clinical and brief because describing it in detail required revisiting the sound, and the sound had done something to his nervous system that he didn't intend to perform for an audience. Dumbledore listened without interrupting. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a measured moment. "The voice," he said. "You recognized it." "Not consciously," Harry said. "My body recognized it before I did. Which I think means my magic recognized it." "That is," Dumbledore paused, assembling words carefully, "not unexpected. You carry the mark of his power, Harry. It makes sense that you would register his presence at a level below conscious thought." "Like a scar that knows the weather," Hermione said quietly, and then looked slightly surprised she'd said it aloud. "Precisely so, Miss Granger," Dumbledore said, and his tone was entirely serious. "That is precisely so." Ron leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" "Because Harry's been saying we shouldn't go to the 3rd floor yet, and I've been agreeing with that, but now that it's confirmed, the plan doesn't change significantly," Dumbledore said. "Quirrell is being watched, more closely now, with this new information. The protections around the stone are," he stopped. Harry looked at him. "The stone," he said. Dumbledore regarded him for a moment, then made a small, precise decision that was visible in the slight loosening of his expression. "The Philosopher's Stone," he said. "Created by Nicholas Flamel. It produces the elixir of life and can transform metal to gold. For someone without a physical form who is trying to regain one," he didn't finish. "It's exactly what Voldemort needs," Harry said. "Yes. And Quirrell is working out how to get through the protections." "Also yes. Then the question isn't whether he'll try," Harry said, "it's when. And whether the protections will hold." "They will hold," Dumbledore said, with the confidence of someone who built the thing they're discussing. "The protections require significant magical ability to navigate, even with insider knowledge. Quirrell needs more preparation, you heard him say so." "He said he needed more time," Harry said. "Not that he needed more ability." A small pause. "A fair distinction," Dumbledore acknowledged. "So we watch," Harry said. "We track what he's doing, how he's progressing, what he's learning. If he gets close, you tell me immediately," Dumbledore said. "Not a suggestion." "I'll tell you immediately," Harry agreed. "Then, because precision mattered, and if you're not here." Dumbledore's eyes moved between the 3 of them. Something in his expression did a small, quiet thing, recognition, perhaps, of a question that was also a statement about what happened when adults weren't available. "I will ensure that you have a way to reach me regardless of my location," he said. "A communication mirror. You'll have it today." "Thank you," Harry said. Hermione had been writing in her notebook. She looked up. "Professor Dumbledore. The protections, who else knows what they are?" I mean specifically what each one consists of. Each professor who contributed a protection knows their own piece, he said. I know all of them. Quirrell knows only that they exist, not their individual components. Or that was the arrangement. Given events, he paused. It's possible he's gathered information I'm not aware of. We need to know what the protections are, Hermione said. Not demanding, just stating a logical requirement. Dumbledore looked at her with the attention he apparently reserved for people who'd said something he hadn't expected. Why? Because if Quirrell gets through them and we're the ones in the building when it happens, we need to know what he's already passed, she said. We won't go looking for the stone. But if we need to know whether the situation is urgent or not, we need reference points. The office was quiet. She's right, Harry said. Dumbledore considered this for what felt like a genuine amount of time rather than a performed deliberation. I'll tell you the broad sequence, he said finally. Not every specific detail. Enough to know where the situation stands. He told them. 7 protections, layered. Fluffy, Hagrid's contribution, which Ron mouthed silently and looked at Harry, who gave a fractional headshake because this was not the moment, then Devil's Snare, enchanted keys, a chess game, a troll, a logic puzzle, and finally the stone itself in a mirror. He didn't explain the mirror except to say it was the final protection and that it worked on a principle that he was confident Quirrell would not be able to navigate. What principle? Harry asked. It gives the stone only to someone who wants to find it but not use it, Dumbledore said. Harry sat with that for a moment. The elegant cruelty of it. The logic of protecting something by making the protection contingent on desire. That's brilliant, he said honestly. I thought so, Dumbledore said, with a modesty that was mostly genuine. They left with the communication mirror, a flat oval piece of glass that fit in Harry's palm, and that would emit a specific warmth if Dumbledore was trying to reach him and could be activated by pressing both thumbs to the surface, and a clearer picture of the landscape they were operating in. In the corridor outside the gargoyle, Ron exhaled. Right, he said. So. Devil's Snare, enchanted keys, chess, troll, logic puzzle, mirror. Got it. Why have you memorized that? Hermione said. Because Harry's going to end up down there, Ron said, looking at Harry with the equanimity of someone who'd already processed the inevitable. At some point. And when he does, I want to know what's ahead of him. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. He's not wrong, Harry said. He's absolutely not wrong, she said, in the tone of someone unhappy about agreeing with something. I've been thinking the same thing and I didn't want to say it because saying it feels like encouragement. It's not encouragement, Harry said. It's planning. What's the difference? Encouragement is emotional. Planning is practical. Ron made a gesture that said, you two are exhausting and I'm in, which was, Harry thought, perhaps the most Gryffindor response available. October moved through the castle with the particular authority of Scottish autumn, cold in the mornings, briefly luminous at midday, and dark by 4 in the afternoon with an absoluteness that made the castle's lit windows look deliberate rather than incidental. Harry moved through it in a rhythm that was starting to feel like his, early mornings in the common room before anyone else was up, classes that he engaged with at whatever the actual level of his interest was rather than at a managed lower register, evenings in the library or the common room, the communication mirror always in his inside pocket. Quirrell he watched in 2 registers simultaneously, the surface one, the student in a defense class managing to learn something despite the instructor, and the other one, the accumulation of data points about a man who was doing something terrible and trying to look like he was only doing something inadequate. The data points were interesting. Quirrell had begun visiting the 3rd-floor corridor. Harry tracked this by the timing of his arrivals to breakfast, which shifted in a pattern consistent with someone who'd been somewhere in the castle before the rest of the school was moving. He'd stopped attending the staff table for lunch twice in a week, both times on days when Harry had noticed the castle's ambient magic doing something slightly different on the 3rd floor, a vibration he couldn't name but could feel, like a deep note briefly sounded. He reported all of this to Dumbledore through the mirror, which proved to be two-way in both directions. He could press his thumbs and speak, and Dumbledore's voice would come back, and the conversations were brief and precise in the way both of them apparently preferred. Dumbledore received each report with the calm of someone monitoring a situation they'd set up carefully and were watching develop exactly as engineered, which occasionally made Harry feel like a data point himself rather than a participant, and occasionally he said so. "You're not a data point," Dumbledore said, through the mirror, on a Wednesday night in the dormitory after Harry had raised this directly. "I know," Harry said. "I just want to name the dynamic when I see it." A pause. "That is fair," Dumbledore said. "And I take the point. In the meantime, classes." Snape's potions class was the most interesting classroom dynamic at Hogwarts, which was saying something in a school where McGonagall could transfigure herself into a cat and Flitwick regularly levitated things that weren't supposed to be levitated. It was interesting not because of the potions, though the potions were genuinely interesting, the layered chemistry of it appealing to the same part of Harry's brain that liked chess and liked investigative inference, but because of what Snape was doing with Harry specifically. He went at Harry hard from the first lesson. Questions delivered rapid fire, designed to expose ignorance rather than encourage knowledge. Standing over Harry's cauldron with the critical attention of someone who expected to find fault and was mildly annoyed not to. An assessment register that for anyone else would translate to this student is performing at an advanced level and for Harry translated, via Snape's delivery, to this is suspicious and I'm not ready to commit to approving of it. Bezoar, Snape had said on the second lesson, standing over Harry's shoulder while the rest of the class was still reading the instructions. "Where would you find one and what does it do?" "Stomach of a goat," Harry said, not looking up from his knife work. "Antidote to most poisons." "The mechanism isn't fully understood, it's one of the things your predecessor in this job apparently spent several years researching, according to Volume 4 of the Potions Masters Quarterly, 1971. A silence. "You read the quarterly," Snape said. "I read everything," Harry said. "The quarterly is particularly good." Another silence, which Harry eventually interpreted as Snape recalibrating. Snape never gave him outstanding marks. He gave him exceptional, which Harry gathered was Snape's private category above outstanding that he didn't make public because to make it public would require acknowledging the reason for it. Harry accepted this arrangement without comment. He didn't need Snape's approval, the work was its own reward, and Snape knew it was good, and that was sufficient. Ron had a different relationship with potions, which was that he found it deeply tedious and was mystified by the fact that Harry didn't. "It's just following instructions," Ron said, one Thursday afternoon, salvaging his forgetfulness potion from a trajectory toward failure. "No, it isn't," Harry said. "The instructions are the starting point. You have to understand why each step is what it is or the variations will lose you every time." He reached across and adjusted the temperature under Ron's cauldron by removing a small piece of the fuel, then added 3 precise clockwise stirs. The color corrected itself. "The reason you add the Lethe River water before the valerian sprigs and not after is because the water alkalizes the base. If the base isn't alkaline the valerian compounds react wrong and you get the purple you were getting." Ron stared at his now correct potion. "Right. Why doesn't the book just say that?" "It assumes you already have the foundational chemistry," Hermione said from his other side. "Which we don't, because Muggle school doesn't cover magical chemistry and wizarding primary education apparently doesn't either." "My primary education was Fred and George trying to convince me the safe thing to eat was whatever they said it was," Ron said. "Which turns out to be not very educational chemically." Harry's mouth curved. The three of them had developed a dynamic in class that worked because they each genuinely contributed something different, Hermione's breadth of pre-reading, Harry's ability to identify why things worked rather than just that they did, Ron's talent for asking exactly the question that revealed everyone else had been assuming an answer. The combination was, as the first month of classes had confirmed, considerably more effective than any of them individually. The mirror warmed in his pocket during herbology on October 16. He waited until the end of the lesson, which took enormous patience because the warmth persisted, and walked with deliberate unhaste to a secluded section of the greenhouse corridor before pressing his thumbs to the glass. The hearing is tomorrow, Dumbledore said. His voice was steady. Miss Voss has confirmed the timeline is holding. I wanted you to hear it from me as well. Thank you, Harry said. McGonagall will come to escort you from the school in the morning. You'll return by evening. A pause. Are you prepared? Harry thought about this genuinely. Not the statement, that was ready, sent weeks ago, already in Lyra's files. But the room itself. The Wizengamot. The memories played in sequence in front of strangers. Vernon and Petunia on the other side of a courtroom. Yes, he said. Then I'll see you in the morning, Dumbledore said, and the mirror cooled. Harry stood in the greenhouse corridor for a moment. Outside the tall windows the grounds were very green and very gold, the trees at the edge of the forest doing the particular autumn thing where they looked like they were burning slowly. He breathed. Ron was behind him when he turned around. He'd followed from herbology with the instinct of someone who'd noticed the pace change. He wasn't asking anything, just standing there with his hands in his pockets and his straightforward, uncomplicated availability. Tomorrow's the hearing, Harry said. Yeah, Ron said. You okay? I'm fine. Are you actually fine or, I'm actually fine, Harry said. I think I'm ready for it to happen. I've been waiting for it to happen and I want it to be done. Ron nodded. We'll be here when you get back. Harry looked at him. You don't have to, mate, Ron said, in the tone of someone who found the sentence he was hearing mildly offensive. Obviously we'll be here. Harry thought about the word obviously and what it meant to have it applied to something that had for 10 years been entirely the opposite of obvious. He thought about it and set it aside for later, because later was when he processed things like this, not in greenhouse corridors with herbology dirt on both their hands. Right, he said. Thanks. They walked back toward the castle. The Wizengamot convened in a courtroom Harry hadn't seen before, underground and stone and circular in the way of rooms designed to make the center of them feel significant. He sat in the gallery with McGonagall on his left and Lyra Voss on his right, and looked at the configuration. 50-odd Wizengamot members in purple robes and pointed hats arranged in a horseshoe. Amelia Bones at the fore, with the controlled energy of someone who'd been preparing for this for months and was ready to be done with the preparation and into the thing itself. A section of the courtroom set aside for witnesses and interested parties, where Dumbledore sat, not in his Wizengamot robes, just present, exactly as he'd said. Vernon and Petunia Dursley were seated to one side, facing the council. Vernon was in the suit he wore to important meetings, which told Harry everything about how he'd processed this, as a business problem, something to be managed and navigated. His face was the controlled red of a man trying not to show how frightened he was. Petunia was very still, in a way that Harry found harder to read than Vernon. She'd declined legal representation. She'd said she intended to speak for herself. The formal charges were read. They were, when laid out in full, comprehensive in a way that Harry gathered was partly Lyra's work and partly Bones's, every specific incident documented in the memories, each one set against the relevant section of Wizarding Child Protection Law. They took 9 minutes to read. 9 minutes of specifics that accumulated into the unmistakable architecture of a pattern. Vernon's solicitor immediately moved to challenge the admissibility of the memory evidence. He had 3 arguments, all of them anticipatable: the absence of a wand signature making source verification impossible, the emotional character of accidental magic potentially compromising objective accuracy, and the precedent of spontaneous magical transmission having no established legal framework. Amelia Bones disposed of all 3, with the precision of someone who'd expected exactly these arguments and had prepared for them months ago. On the source question, the address visible in multiple memories, the documented guardianship placement, and the Ministry's own records of Harry's magical signature, now on file since his registration at birth, confirmed a match with the magic in the transmissions. On accuracy, 17 expert witnesses had reviewed the memories and found no evidence of distortion, fabrication, or compression. On precedent, the Wizengamot's founding charter explicitly provided for novel forms of evidence when no existing framework covered the situation. The solicitor sat down. Lyra stood up. She walked the Wiesengemot through the memories in sequence, not all 47, a curated 22, selected to demonstrate the pattern most clearly. They played in the viewing cradle at the center of the courtroom, large enough for every member to see. Harry watched the members of the Wiesengemot watching his memories. He watched their faces. He was good at watching faces. Some of them were difficult to read. Some weren't. An older woman in the second row put her hand to her mouth at memory 11, the one from when Harry was 6, the one where Vernon's voice was very loud in a way that didn't require showing what his hands were doing. A younger man to the left went still in the specific way of someone who had stopped performing neutrality and was just responding. A woman in the back who had looked skeptical through the first 6 memories looked skeptical no longer by the 14th. When the sequence ended, the courtroom was quiet for a moment in the way that a room is quiet when it's done absorbing something and hasn't yet moved to what comes next. Amelia Bones called Petunia to speak. Petunia stood up. She was thin in a way Harry had always known, but that looked different here, out of the Privet Drive context, somehow less like a choice and more like the result of holding herself very tightly for a very long time. She looked at the Wiesengemot. She did not look at Harry. "I know you want me to say I didn't know what I was doing," she said. Her voice was remarkably steady. "Or that I thought it was, that it was for his own good. That's what Vernon believes. He'll say something like that today and he'll mean it." A pause. "I won't say that. I knew what I was doing. I was angry." She stopped. Looked at her hands. "I was angry for 20 years and it came out on a child and I knew that. I knew it the whole time." The courtroom was very still. "I'm not asking for leniency," she said. I want to say it plainly. Because I've been saying everything else instead of this for so long." She sat back down. Harry looked at her. Not with warmth, he wasn't performing warmth he didn't have. But with something like acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement you gave a person who had finally done the smallest possible version of the right thing. Vernon's statement was what Harry had expected, "Not me, circumstantially, don't appreciate the interference, wizard business shouldn't apply to a normal family, the boy was adequately provided for." His solicitor added several clauses about what adequately provided for meant legally, which was interesting because it turned out wizarding child welfare law was rather more specific than Vernon's solicitor had clearly prepared for. When Harry's statement was read aloud, by a clerk, not by Harry himself, which he decided was the more effective choice, it landed in the room differently than Petunia's or Vernon's. Not louder. More precise. The language of it, the deliberate even register, the absence of performance, made the specifics land harder, not softer. He heard it read aloud and thought, yes. That's it. That's exactly it. McGonagall's hand, beside him, rested flat on the bench between them, not quite touching his own. He noticed. The deliberation took 3 hours. Harry, McGonagall, and Lyra waited in an anteroom that had the atmosphere of a room specifically designed for uncomfortable waiting, stone floors, narrow windows, a single painting of a bowl of fruit that had made its peace with its existence. Lyra worked. McGonagall sat very straight. Harry read. When the Wiesengemot returned, Amelia Bones read the verdicts. Vernon Dursley, guilty on 11 counts of physical cruelty, 16 counts of deliberate deprivation, 4 counts of willful endangerment of a magical minor. The sentence was a combination of significant fines paid into a ministry welfare fund, 2 years of mandatory monitoring, and a permanent notation in his ministry file that would affect his capacity to have any dealings with the wizarding world. There were additional Muggle charges referred to the appropriate authority. Petunia Dursley, guilty on 9 counts of deliberate deprivation, 6 counts of psychological cruelty, 2 counts of willful endangerment. A lesser sentence, monitored probation, fines, mandatory ministry assessment, differentiated from Vernon's on the grounds of the acknowledged intent evidence her statement had provided. Neither of them looked at Harry when the verdicts were read. Harry looked at both of them. Not with satisfaction, not with relief. With the same clear, informational regard he gave most things. It was done. The system had done what Lyra had told him it would do, what his magic, at age 1, had apparently decided it needed to do. The witnesses, the evidence, the architecture of years of documented harm, had built a case that held. In the corridor afterward, while McGonagall spoke with Amelia Bones and other ministry officials moved around them in the specific post-trial energy of people who had somewhere to be, Lyra Voss found Harry standing by the window that looked up toward the atrium. "How are you?" she asked. "I keep being asked that," Harry said. "Because people keep meaning it." He thought about this. "I don't feel like I expected to feel," he said. "I thought there'd be something bigger. A release of some kind." "That's pretty normal," she said. "The release usually comes later. Sometimes much later. The hearing is a public event. The feeling is private and it has its own schedule." "Right." He looked out the window. "It's enough, though," he said. "It's enough that it happened. That there's a record now. That it exists, officially, as a fact." He paused. "My magic did that. At 1 year old. It sent those memories here because it needed them to exist." Lyra was quiet. "I think about that a lot," Harry said. "What it knew." "Me too," she said. He looked at her. 2 months since she'd come to Privet Drive and knocked on the gate. 2 months of her being the most reliable adult in a situation that had required reliable adults urgently. He thought about saying something that would convey this, then thought about how she'd receive it, and said instead, "I'll let you know how the year goes." She smiled, the real version, not the professional one. "I'd like that." McGonagall returned and they went up through the ministry and into the London afternoon, which was cold and grey and indifferent to the fact that something significant had just concluded underground, as London afternoons generally were. Back at Hogwarts by evening, as Ron had promised. They were in the common room when he came through the portrait hole, Ron on the couch with a chessboard, Hermione at the table with a book she was clearly not reading, both of them with the specific quality of attention of people who were pretending to be occupied and weren't. They looked up when he came in. He sat down in the chair nearest the fire. The common room was mostly empty, a few older students on the other side, nothing close. "Guilty," he said. "Both of them." Ron let out a breath. Hermione's shoulders dropped by approximately half an inch, which for Hermione was the equivalent of visible collapse. "Good," Ron said, simply and entirely. "Good," Harry agreed. They sat with it for a moment, all three of them, in the warm firelight of Gryffindor Tower, letting the weight settle into the floor where it belonged. It wasn't a celebration exactly. It was more like the moment after putting down something heavy. The acknowledgement of the weight by the absence of it. Then Ron said, "Do you want to play chess? I've been practicing a new opening George sent me from home and I want to know if it's actually clever or if George has convinced me it's clever, which is completely different." Harry looked at the board. "Bring it," he said. Hermione pulled her actual book out from under the book she'd been pretending to read and settled deeper into her chair. The fire crackled. The castle breathed. Outside the tower windows the October stars were out in full, cold and clear and entirely indifferent, the way very old things are indifferent, not hostile, just vast, going on at their own scale. Harry moved his first piece. Ron's new opening, it turned out, was genuinely clever. Fred had clearly been involved in the conceptualization, which meant it was disguised as something simple and turned out to be 3 moves ahead of where it looked. Harry adjusted twice, found the counter, and they played for an hour in comfortable silence broken by occasional muttering from Ron and occasional commentary from Hermione that she didn't intend them to hear but that turned out to be useful twice. At some point during the second game, Harry became aware that the pressure that had been sitting in his chest since the first week of September, since the mirror, the confirmation, the waiting, the hearing, all of it, had shifted. Not gone. But settled. Reorganized into something that felt less like weight and more like information. Quirrell was still in the building. The stone was still on the third floor. The year still had something coming. He was aware of all of it. He was also sitting in a warm room with two people who showed up, in a castle that felt like his, in a world that had known his name his whole life and was only now beginning to know him. He took Ron's bishop in a move Ron didn't see coming. "Oh, come on," Ron said. Hermione, behind her book, made a small sound of satisfaction. Harry reset his pieces and waited for Ron's next move with all the patience of someone who had learned, very young, that the capacity to wait was its own kind of strength. The fire went on. The castle breathed. He was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 6, The Unspeakable Truth. The Wizengamot reconvened in December. Not for the Dursleys, that matter was concluded, filed, and referred to the relevant monitoring bodies. This convening was different in character, and everyone who received the notification knew it, because the notification itself was unusual, delivered by hand, by senior DMLE officers, to specific individuals, with no copies through the standard mail system. It arrived at Hogwarts addressed to Dumbledore on a Tuesday morning, and Harry knew about it by Tuesday afternoon because Dumbledore told him. The subject was not the Dursley verdict. The subject was the question of how Harry Potter had come to be placed in a household the Ministry's own archive had been documenting for 6 years, and who had made that decision, and what their justification had been, and whether the wizarding world's most prominent and trusted figure had known, should have known, or could have been expected to know. The summons was for Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry read the notification in Dumbledore's office on Tuesday evening. He read it twice, handed it back, and said, "How are you handling it?" Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon spectacles with an expression that contained, Harry thought, genuine surprise, not at the question, but at the way it was asked. "Not are you all right or what will you do? How are you handling it?" The distinction mattered. "With the full candor I intend to bring to the room," Dumbledore said. "Amelia Bones did not send this as a courtesy. She sent it because the Wizengamot requires my account, and I intend to give it without qualification. She told me she was considering it," Harry said. "After the Dursley verdict. She said it wasn't finished." "No," Dumbledore said. "She's right that it isn't." Harry nodded. He sat back in the chair across the desk. The chair was becoming familiar, which he thought meant something. "I've been asked to give additional testimony," he said. "Not just the written statement this time. They want me in the room." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" "I've been thinking about that word feel," Harry said. "Everyone uses it and I think they mean something different each time." He looked at the window. The December grounds were snow-covered and blue in the evening light. "I want to be in that room. I want to say what I want to say. Whether that constitutes feeling anything in particular about it, I'm not sure. I suspect," Dumbledore said, "that it constitutes a great many things, which you are processing in your own particular and rather remarkable way." "Don't start," Harry said. "I beg your pardon." "The remarkable thing." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "Everyone does it. McGonagall. Voss. Now you. I'm not remarkable. I'm just paying attention and saying true things. People who've had comfortable lives find that unusual." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, an actual, unguarded sound, brief and warm. "That," he said, "is the most accurate thing I've heard said about the wizarding world in 30 years. The reconvening was December 9th, and Lyra Voss was in her element. She had been preparing for this since October 18th, since the morning after the Dursley verdict when she'd walked into Amelia Bones's office and set a second file on the desk, this one considerably thicker than the first, and said, "The placement decision." Bones had picked it up without speaking. "Dumbledore placed him with the Dursleys in November 1981, Lyra said. He filed the guardianship paperwork with the Muggle Authority and a separate notification with the Ministry. The Ministry notification was processed and filed. It noted that Harry Potter was to reside with his nearest Muggle relatives under a blood protection ward. It noted no welfare provisions. No follow-up schedule. No periodic review requirement. She paused. Standard procedure for an orphaned magical child at that time required a 6-monthly welfare review conducted by ministry officials. That review never occurred. Not once, in 9 years, until I initiated the first one this past August. Bones had looked at her steadily. The procedure existed, Lyra said. Dumbledore was aware of it. The department head who processed the original notification was also aware of it. Neither of them flagged the absence of follow-up reviews. She paused. The department head at the time was a man named Bartemius Crouch Sr. He's currently in a different role, but he's still in the ministry. I know who Bartemius Crouch is, Bones said. Then you know this is going to be complicated, Lyra said. But I think it has to go forward. Bones had picked up her quill. Write it up, she said. All of it. Lyra had written it up. All of it. The placement decision, the review requirement, the documented absence of any review in 9 years, the mechanism by which the archive transmissions had been received and filed and stamped low priority on 3 separate occasions. The chain of decisions, some made actively, some made by deliberate inaction, that had kept Harry Potter in a documented abusive environment for 9 years while the ministry's own records accumulated evidence. She had been thorough in the way that only people who were both meticulous and genuinely angry could be thorough. Every date, every stamp, every signature on every misfiling. The architecture of institutional failure, brick by brick. December 9th arrived and Lyra walked into the Wisengamot chamber carrying her files and the steady heartbeat of someone who'd been building toward a room for a long time. Harry sat in the witness gallery beside McGonagall and watched Lyra testify. She was extraordinary. Not in the showy sense, she didn't perform, didn't declaim, didn't fill the room with feeling. She was exact. She went through the documentation with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of someone who understood that the most powerful argument was one that built itself from facts until the conclusion was not reached but arrived at. The memories played again, not all 47 this time. The first one, the one with his mother. And then a sequence of 10, selected differently than the October sequence. These ones were chosen not to demonstrate the abuse, the Wisengamot had already seen that, but to demonstrate the duration. 6 years of transmissions. 6 years of a child's magic screaming into the ministry archive and receiving, in return, a filing stamp. The first transmission was received in November of 1981, Lyra said, standing before the council. It was reviewed by an unspeakable whose name is in my documentation and who is present in this building today. He reviewed it, noted no wand signature, and filed it under miscellaneous residual emanations, unresolved, low priority. She turned one page in her file with the specific deliberateness of someone who knew the effect of deliberateness. I've spoken with him. He says he didn't connect the transmission to a specific child because there was no identifying information visible in that first memory. She paused. He's correct. There wasn't. The address became visible in Memory 12 and Memory 23. Memory 12 was received in 1986. It was reviewed. It was also marked low priority and refiled. The chamber was very quiet. At no point between 1981 and my appointment to the archive did any unspeakable connect the series of transmissions to a specific child and take it to the DMLE, Lyra said. I want to be precise here. I am not saying the individuals involved were malicious. I am saying the institutional environment, the culture of the Department of Mysteries, the emphasis on compartmentalization and non-disclosure, the chronic understaffing of the archive, created a situation in which evidence of sustained child abuse was repeatedly reviewed and repeatedly deprioritized. She set down the page. The outcome is identical regardless of intent. I want the Wisengamot to understand that. Amelia Bones, in her chair at the fore, had the expression of someone who had written the exact argument Lyra had just made, months ago, in her own notes, and was hearing it articulated in public for the first time and finding that it landed harder than she'd expected. The placement decision itself, Lyra continued. In November 1981, Albus Dumbledore placed Harry Potter with the Dursley family under a blood protection ward. The Ministry was notified. The notification was processed by Bartemius Crouch Sr., then head of the DMLE. The notification did not include a welfare review schedule, which was mandatory under the 1974 Magical Children's Welfare Act. That omission was not flagged by Crouch's department. The review was never initiated. She looked up. I want to be precise about Bartemius Crouch's role as well, she said. His primary failure is administrative, the failure to flag the missing review requirement. His office received a notification about a placed magical child without welfare provisions and processed it without query. That is a professional failure of significant consequence. What Dumbledore knew or didn't know about the review requirement is a separate question. One I intend to address, Dumbledore said. He was seated at a specific place reserved for those called to account rather than those giving testimony, a chair rather than a standing position, which carried its own weight. He'd arrived early. He'd declined all offers of legal representation with the polite finality of someone who'd made a clear decision. He was in simple dark robes. No purple Wisengamot finery, no long train of formal authority. He looked like a very old man who had decided to take up a small amount of space. The Wisengamot turned to him. He stood. I was aware of the welfare review requirement, he said. The 1974 Act was passed during my tenure as Wisengamot member, and I voted for it. I knew what it required. He let that land fully before continuing. When I filed the placement notification for Harry, I did not include a welfare review schedule because I intended to handle Harry's welfare personally, without ministry involvement. He paused. I believed that ministry involvement would compromise the secrecy of his location. Voldemort had people in most levels of the ministry in 1981, which is true, and documented. I was not wrong to believe that. Another pause, longer. I was wrong to believe that my personal oversight was sufficient substitute for formal welfare provisions. Because I never provided it. The chamber held the silence. I placed Harry with the Dursleys and I did not go back, Dumbledore said. I convinced myself that the blood wards were protection enough, that the magic itself would serve as safeguard. I did not separate the physical protection from the emotional and practical welfare of a child in that home. He looked out at the council. I knew Petunia Dursley's character. I'd met her. I knew she had not had an easy relationship with her sister, or with magic, or with the circumstances that had placed her nephew in her care. I told myself that family was family, that the biological pull would do work I was not doing. I was wrong. An older Wisengamot member, Tiberius Ogden, who Harry recognized from descriptions, a man who'd been on the council for 40 years and whose opinions carried significant weight, leaned forward. Dumbledore. You say you intended personal oversight. Did you conduct any oversight at all between November 1981 and August of this year? No, Dumbledore said. You had no contact with the boy? None. Until the guardianship hearing in August. And prior to Miss Voss's discovery, were you aware of the nature of conditions in the Dursley household? No. He held the old man's gaze. I was not. I had assumed, and I recognized the inadequacy of this word, that conditions were difficult but livable. I did not verify. That is the core of my failure. Not malice. Assumption untested by accountability. Ogden sat back. Amelia Bones said, Professor Dumbledore. What would you say to those who argue that your willingness to bypass legal welfare requirements, however well-intentioned, represents an arrogation of unilateral authority that this council cannot simply note and move past? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I would say they're right, he said. I have operated for a long time on the basis of my own judgment in situations where that judgment was not adequately checked by anyone. The outcomes have not always been poor. In this case, the outcome was very poor indeed. I am not in a position to argue that the trust placed in my judgment by the wizarding world has been uniformly deserved. He stopped. I can only tell you what I intend to do differently, and allow the council to decide whether that is sufficient. Harry was called to the floor after Dumbledore sat down. He walked to the center of the chamber and turned to face the council, and the scale of the room didn't adjust for him. It was built for adults, for significance, for the weight of institutional process. He stood in it without accommodating himself to it, just occupying his own space in it, which was enough. Harry, Amelia Bones said. Your written statement has been entered into the record. I'd like to give you the opportunity to add to it, or to speak to anything you've heard today, if you wish. Thank you, Harry said. He looked at the council. 50-odd faces, most of them unfamiliar, all of them watching him with the specific quality of people who'd heard a great deal today and were still in the process of absorbing it. I don't have a lot to add to what's been said, Harry said. The statement covers what I wanted it to cover. Lyra Voss's testimony is more precise about the institutional dimension than I could be. He paused. I want to say something about Professor Dumbledore's testimony, if that's permitted. Bones nodded. Harry turned slightly, not to look at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was not the audience, but to address the room while being clear about who he was addressing. He told you the truth, Harry said. I've been in his office several times this term. I've had a number of conversations with him about the placement, about my parents, about what he knew and didn't know. He's been honest with me consistently. He's made no attempt to manage my perception of what happened or to minimize his role in it. He paused. I'm not saying this to absolve him. I'm saying it because I think the distinction between someone who's being honest now versus someone who's trying to manage the room is relevant information, and you should have it. He looked at the council directly. I also want to be clear, he said, that what I want from this process is not punishment. I said that in my written statement and I mean it. What I want is what my magic apparently decided it needed when I was a year old. I want it to be a fact. Officially. Permanently. Part of the record of what happened in the wizarding world. Not buried, not managed, not decided by any one person to be necessary and therefore not to be examined. He paused. Whatever this council decides in terms of consequences for the individuals involved, I trust the process. I only ask that the process be complete. He went back to his seat. McGonagall's hand rested beside his on the bench again, not quite touching, exactly as it had in October. He wondered if she knew she did it. The deliberation took 4 hours. Lyra spent most of it in the corridor, pacing in a way that she'd told Harry she never paced, and was visibly pacing. He sat against the wall and read, and occasionally she'd pass him and say something observational about the architecture, and he'd respond, and this continued for 4 hours without becoming tedious. At one point McGonagall came out and joined them. She stood at the window for a while without speaking, which was fine. Then she said, "You handled yourself very well in there." "Thank you," Harry said. "The bit about Dumbledore's honesty," she said. "Was that strategic?" Harry considered the question. It deserved a real answer. "Both," he said. "It's true, and I thought it was relevant for the council to hear. But I also knew that saying it would land differently than if he said it about himself." McGonagall looked at him. "You're 11 years old." "Almost 12, Harry said. "That's not," she started, then stopped, and did the thing she occasionally did when Harry said something that required recalibration. She looked away briefly and looked back and let her expression settle into something that was more straightforwardly fond than she perhaps intended. "You're going to be a very significant wizard," she said, in a tone that was half compliment and half warning to herself about her own expectations. "McGonagall," Harry said. "Professor McGonagall." "Professor McGonagall," he said. "I know." Lyra, passing on her third lap, made a sound that was nearly a laugh. The verdicts, when they came, were careful and specific and did not take the easy path. Bartemius Crouch Sr., formal censure, entry in his ministry record, mandatory review of all child placement files processed under his department during his tenure. Not termination, not criminal charge, but permanent institutional record, which in the ministry's culture was its own significant consequence. The relevant unspeakable who had reviewed the archive transmissions, mandatory retraining, departmental review of archive procedures, no formal censure on the individual level given the systemic nature of the failure. The Department of Mysteries itself, a formal audit of the archive and its classification procedures. A new mandatory protocol for any transmission involving an identified child. An independent oversight body, reporting to the DMLE, to review all cases where spontaneous magical transmission had been received and not acted upon. And Albus Dumbledore. The chamber was very still for this one. Formal censure. Entered into his ministry record permanently. An official finding that he had failed in his duty of care to a placed magical child through sustained inaction, compounded by the circumvention of standard welfare review procedures. He was removed from his position as chief warlock of the Wizengamot, not Hogwarts, not his Order of Merlin, not his standing as the foremost magical authority in Britain. Just this, the formal recognition that the highest authority of wizarding law could not be held by someone whose record contained this. A number of Wizengamot members looked uncomfortable with this. Several clearly wanted to argue. Ogden held the room with the controlled authority of someone who'd argued this internally already and was not going to argue it again. Dumbledore received the verdict standing. He received it with the quality Harry had noticed in his office in August, the capacity to look at a true thing without flinching. He nodded, once, to Ogden, and sat. Afterward, in the corridor, Harry found him. Not looking for him, they simply occupied the same space in the post-session movement of people. Dumbledore was standing by a stone pillar with the quality of a man who was not trying to get anywhere and was comfortable with that. Harry stopped. Dumbledore looked at him. "Are you all right?" Harry asked. "That's the second time you've asked me that question," Dumbledore said. "It's the second time it's been relevant." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, complex, genuine, and without the quality of performance that Harry had learned to identify as the layer between Dumbledore and the room. This was underneath that layer. "I am," he said, "managing." "That's honest," Harry said. "I find it increasingly difficult to be anything else around you," Dumbledore said, and the warmth in it was entirely unguarded. Harry nodded. "Good." He started to move past, then stopped. Looked back. "The chief warlock position," he said. "Is that, it is what it is," Dumbledore said. "It's also what I deserve." "I know," Harry said. "I was going to say, is the work you were doing in that role something that needs doing? The broader wizarding governance work." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Then we'll need to think about who does it," Harry said. "Eventually." He walked away. Behind him, Dumbledore stood at his pillar and watched Harry go with an expression that the portraits in his office would have recognized, the one he wore when he'd encountered a thing that had changed the shape of his thinking permanently. He wore it rarely and it was always genuine. Lyra found Harry at the Ministry atrium fireplace while McGonagall dealt with some post-session administrative requirement. She handed him a copy of the session summary, a document that would be filed, published in the Daily Prophet in some form, and entered into the permanent record of the Wizengamot's proceedings. "Your copy," she said. "To keep." He took it. Looked at his name in the third paragraph. Harry James Potter, age 11, the subject of the foregoing placement matter. "It's in the record," Lyra said. "Yes," he said. "Permanently." "Yes." She looked at him with the careful, specific attention she'd had since the garden in August. "Okay," she said. Just that, just the one word, which from Lyra meant the same as a longer question and was more precise for its brevity. Harry thought about all of it, the transmissions in the archive, the 47 memory bubbles that had been building the case while he slept in a cupboard not knowing anyone was listening. The year-old magic that had decided the world needed to know. The process that had gone from archive to Lyra's desk to Amelia Bones to the Wiesengemot to this corridor on a December evening. It took 11 years, he said. But it didn't disappear. That's what I kept thinking about in there. My magic sent those memories because it didn't want this to disappear. And it didn't. Lyra was quiet. That's enough, Harry said. It doesn't have to be everything. It just has to be enough. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she'd had the first time she'd used his name, the recalibration, the specific adjustment of someone encountering a person who consistently exceeded their anticipation. Then she put her hand out and he shook it, very formally, which was somehow exactly right for both of them. Go back to school, she said. There's things there that need my attention, he agreed. The stone. Among other things. She nodded. Be careful. I'm always careful, Harry said. That's what worries me, she said, and she was smiling when she said it. He went through the flue with McGonagall, and the castle received him with the particular warmth of a very large building that had been waiting for a very specific occupant to come back. The common room was roaring with fire and noise when he came through the portrait hole. It was evening, dinner just ended, the post-dinner social chaos of 200 Gryffindors being themselves. Ron was at the table by the window with a chess problem and a mug of something steaming. He looked up. Read Harry's face with the accuracy of someone who'd been doing it for 3 months. How'd it go? Harry dropped into the chair across from him. Done, he said. Genuinely done. All of it. All of it. Censures, records, audits, the whole thing. It's in the record. Ron picked up his mug, held it out across the table. Harry looked at it for a second, then picked up his own from the side table where he'd left it before the trip and touched it to Ron's. Right then, Ron said. Hermione appeared from the direction of the girls' stairs with a book under her arm and stopped when she saw Harry's face, which was apparently sufficiently readable from across the common room. She came over and sat in the third chair and put the book on the table face down. Tell me everything, she said. So he did. He told them all of it, Lyra's testimony, Dumbledore's account, the verdicts, the censure, the specific language of the Wiesengemot's findings. He told it methodically, with the same precision he'd brought to every other aspect of it, and Hermione asked sharp questions at the right moments, and Ron made the right sounds at the right moments, and the fire went down and was built back up by a fifth-year prefect without anyone asking her to. When he was finished, the common room was quieter, the lateness of the hour having thinned the population to the committed and the homework desperate. Harry looked at the fire. He thought about the mirror in his pocket, Dumbledore's communication mirror, and the stone on the 3rd floor, and Quirrell's voice in the staffroom corridor, and all the things that were still ahead. The completed things sat behind him, done and documented. The ongoing things sat ahead. Quirrell's been to the 3rd floor twice this week, Harry said. Ron and Hermione shifted forward without being asked. Hermione had her notebook out before Harry's next sentence. I think the timeline is moving faster, Harry said. I need to talk to Dumbledore again when he's back. What do we need to prepare for? Hermione asked. Everything after the chess set, Harry said. That's where we might end up needed. Ron looked at his chess problem. Then at Harry. You know, he said, I've been practicing. Harry looked at him. Just saying, Ron said. If there's an enchanted chess situation. I've been practicing. Harry's mouth curved. Fully, this time, the whole thing, the version that had been waiting for a hospitable environment and had found one. It happened rarely enough that Ron blinked slightly when he saw it. Then we're ahead of the game, Harry said. Outside, the Scottish winter pressed its full weight against the castle walls, and the castle absorbed it, and the fire kept burning, and 3 11-year-olds sat around a table in the warm and made their plans. Chapter 7, Fire Under the Stone. January came in like something that had been waiting a long time to arrive and was not going to be subtle about it. Snow buried the Hogwarts grounds under 3 feet and kept adding, the lake froze to a depth that made the giant squid invisible beneath it, and the castle corridors developed crossdrafts that materialized around corners without warning and carried the specific chill of Scottish winter at altitude. Harry didn't mind the cold. He'd slept in a cupboard with inadequate heating for 9 years. His tolerance for physical discomfort was calibrated in ways that made him practically impervious to things other students found miserable, which occasionally startled people who expected him to complain. What he minded was the waiting. He'd spoken with Dumbledore twice since December, brief, precise conversations through the mirror and one in-person meeting in the first week of January. Quirrell had pulled back from the 3rd floor over the Christmas holiday, which might have meant the extra castle surveillance during the break had made him cautious, or might have meant he was trying a different approach. Harry tracked the behavioral patterns, Quirrell's meal attendance, his office hours, the specific days when the magic on the 3rd floor felt different. He reported everything. Dumbledore listened to everything and said, with the same calm he brought to all of it, that the protections were holding. Harry believed him. He also kept tracking. The real work of January was Quidditch, and classes, and the specific ongoing project of watching Snape. Snape remained one of the most interesting puzzles at Hogwarts. Harry had assembled considerable data on him over 4 months and was still not certain what to do with it. The man was brilliant, his potions instruction, stripped of its theatrical hostility, was probably the best teaching Harry received, because Snape's explanations went through the technique to the principle underneath, which was exactly how Harry's brain wanted to receive information. He was also demonstrably complicated in his feelings about Harry, which had nothing to do with Harry's work. The work clearly satisfied Snape, and everything to do with the name and the face and the eyes that everyone kept mentioning. He'd seen Snape in the stands at the first Quidditch match of the season, muttering. He'd seen, also in the stands, Quirrell, who had been muttering with somewhat more intensity. He'd been on his broom at the time and hadn't had a great deal of opportunity for extended observation, but the match itself had told him something useful. His broom had responded strangely, bucking and shuddering, and from the ground Hermione had put an incendio into Quirrell's robes and the broom had steadied immediately. He'd told Dumbledore this too. The counter-curse, Dumbledore had said, through the mirror. Whoever cast it interrupted Quirrell. Hermione interrupted Quirrell, Harry said. She was the one who, yes, Dumbledore said. That particular 11-year-old has, I suspect, a great deal of interesting future ahead of her. Harry looked at the mirror. Why was Snape muttering at the same time? A pause. Snape was performing the counter-curse, Dumbledore said. Quirrell was countering his counter-curse. Harry held this information. Turned it. Snape was trying to protect me. Yes. He thought about the staff room corridor, Snape's face at the sorting, the way he'd stood at Harry's shoulder in potions with that controlled expression. Thought about Snape stopping in the corridor and saying your mother's eyes with the weight of something carried for 20 years. He knew my mother, Harry said. They were friends, Dumbledore said, carefully. For a significant portion of their lives. Harry didn't push further on that. He filed it in the part of his mind reserved for things that needed more information before they could be understood properly. There was a lot in that file. It was an important file. February brought the cold to its worst and also brought a development Harry hadn't anticipated. The Daily Prophet ran the story. Not a full account, the Wisingamot proceedings were published in summary, which meant the reporting was selective and filtered through whatever lens the Prophet's editorial staff applied to ministry news. But enough. Enough for the wizarding world to read that Harry Potter had spent his first decade in a household documented by the ministry as abusive, that Albus Dumbledore had received a formal censure in connection with the placement, and that the Wisingamot had opened a broader inquiry into institutional child welfare procedures. The response inside Hogwarts was immediate and came in several varieties. The first was students who looked at Harry differently. This happened over the course of a single breakfast, the Prophet arriving with the morning owls, the story being read, tables going quiet and then noisy and then quiet again in the specific pattern of places where news was metabolized communally. Harry ate his eggs and watched it happen and let it. The second variety was students who came to talk to him. He handled this with the economy of someone who'd already said everything he intended to say in the place where it mattered and had nothing left to perform. "Is it true?" said a Hufflepuff second year, appearing beside him in the corridor between Transfiguration and Defense. She had the expression of someone who'd worked up courage. "Yes," Harry said. "Are you?" "Fine," he said, not unkindly. "I appreciate the concern." She looked at him and then, apparently deciding something, said, "My mum says Dumbledore can do no wrong, and I told her that was obviously not true and she got angry." She paused. "I think she's angry because she knows I'm right." "Probably," Harry said. "It's uncomfortable to revise a belief that's been important to you." She looked at him a moment longer. "You sound like a grown-up." "I've had to be one for a while," Harry said. "You get used to it." The third variety was Draco Malfoy, who had been a steady low-level source of friction since September, not anything Harry found particularly threatening, more like a persistent minor irritant with good tailoring and very poor judgment about who to direct his particular brand of superiority at. Malfoy had tried several approaches with Harry over the first term, the overture of family name to family name pure respect, which Harry had declined without explaining why. The pointed commentary about blood status and Harry's associations, which Harry had declined to find interesting. The Quidditch competition, in which Harry had caught the snitch in 11 minutes flat and Malfoy had been a distant second, which hadn't required a decline so much as a landing. After the prophet story, Malfoy found him in the library on a Wednesday afternoon with a particular expression on his face, not the performing one he usually wore. Something more uncertain underneath it, which Harry noted. "Potter," he said. Harry looked up from his potions text. "Malfoy." Malfoy sat down, which was unexpected. He looked at Harry with the careful assessment of someone who was doing a recalculation in real time. "My father says the prophet exaggerated," he said. "That the whole thing is a ministry political maneuver. What do you think?" Harry said. Malfoy's jaw tightened very slightly. "I think my father says a lot of things." Harry looked at him. The thing about Draco Malfoy, once you got past the performance, which Harry had done fairly early, because performance was the layer, not the fact, was that he was not stupid. He was badly educated in the sense of having been taught that a particular set of beliefs was simply the shape of reality rather than a choice among options. He was also, underneath the performance, aware that something was wrong with that education. He just didn't have anywhere to put that awareness yet. "The story is accurate," Harry said. "Not exaggerated. The Wisengamot documents are public record, you can read them yourself if you want." He paused. "Your father probably has opinions about the Wisengamot's conclusions. That's fine. People can have opinions. The record is still the record." Malfoy was quiet for a moment. "Dumbledore," he said. "My father hates him. Says he's soft on mudbloods." He stopped, apparently catching the word leaving his mouth and having a complex moment about it. "On Muggleborns. But getting censured for," he stopped again. He didn't finish either sentence. "The world doesn't sort neatly into who your father approves of and who he doesn't," Harry said, not unkindly. He went back to his textbook. "It might be useful to start from that." Malfoy sat there for another moment, then left without further comment. Hermione appeared from behind a bookshelf 3 seconds later. She'd been there the whole time, which Harry had known, and which Malfoy had not. "That was," she started. "I know," Harry said. "He might actually think about it," she said, in the tone of someone surprised by their own possibility. "He might," Harry agreed. "He's not as committed to being what he's performing as he thinks he is." He turned a page. "Let him work it out." The mirror warmed in his pocket on a Tuesday in late February. He was in charms, which was unfortunate in the sense that Flitwick was mid-explanation of a complex summoning charm variant and Harry was genuinely interested, but he kept the mirror in his hand under the desk and pressed his thumbs to it between Flitwick's demonstrations. Dumbledore's voice, very quiet. "I have to go to London tomorrow. Ministry summons, a follow-up to the December session that I cannot reschedule. A pause. I expect to be back by Thursday evening. The third-floor protections are all in place and functioning. I've asked Snape to increase his surveillance of Quirrell in my absence. Harry considered. Snape knows about Quirrell. I've brought him into confidence, yes. Partially. He doesn't know the full extent of my suspicions, but he knows to watch. And the mirror works regardless of distance. Yes. Harry kept his expression neutral and his hand still under the desk while Flitwick floated a set of small bronze birds toward a target. What's the minimum threshold for contacting you, he asked, versus handling something myself first. A longer pause this time. The quality of it was the pause of someone who wanted to say contact me immediately for anything and was aware that this instruction would be functionally useless because of who they were talking to. Use your judgment, Dumbledore said finally. If Quirrell moves toward the third floor, contact me immediately. If the situation develops faster than the mirror allows, he stopped. Don't go down there alone. I won't, Harry said. Which was true. He intended to take Ron and Hermione. He closed the mirror and refocused on Flitwick's demonstration, and the rest of the charms lesson proceeded normally, and at lunch he sat between Ron and Hermione and said, very quietly, into the table's ambient noise, Dumbledore's leaving tomorrow. He'll be gone at least 36 hours. Ron and Hermione both went still in their own specific ways, Ron's a physical stillness that meant he was switching from a default gear to a different one, Hermione's a stillness that meant she was already several steps into consequence mapping. Is this it? Ron said. I don't know, Harry said honestly. But if Quirrell's going to move, he'll move when Dumbledore's gone. I want to be ready. Define ready, Hermione said. Devil's snare, you know the countercharm better than either of us, Harry said, looking at her. The key room, I'll figure out the right key in the air. The chess, he looked at Ron. Ready, Ron said. No hesitation. The logic puzzle, I'll handle, Hermione said. And what about what's actually down there? Ron said. The mirror thing. I'll handle that too, Harry said. Ron and Hermione looked at each other. Not the look of people with doubts, the look of people confirming that they'd already individually arrived at the same conclusion and were now verifying it externally. All right, Ron said. One more thing, Harry said. If this happens, when this happens, it's going to put Quirrell in a position where he has no more time to prepare. Which means whatever I face down there is going to be at the level it's at now, not worse. He looked at them both. The moment I know he's moving, we move first. We get there before he does. Hermione looked at him. You want to intercept him. I want to be between him and the stone before he gets there, Harry said. He has to go through everything that we have to go through. We're faster because we already know the sequence. How do you know we're faster? Ron said. Because he's been feeling his way through those protections for months, Harry said, and we've spent those same months figuring out exactly what each one requires. Ron nodded slowly. Chess in the dark against enchanted pieces, he said. Fine. I've played worse. When have you played worse? Hermione said. Christmas with Fred, Ron said darkly. Absolutely no rules, no light, and he'd charmed the pieces to commentate in a different language. Harry's mouth moved. He picked up his fork. Be ready, he said. From tomorrow. Wednesday passed without incident. Thursday morning passed without incident and had the specific quality of a day being very normal in a way that felt deliberate. Thursday afternoon, 5 minutes before the end of potions, Snape stopped at Harry's cauldron. This was not unusual. Snape stopped at most cauldrons. What was unusual was that he stopped and said nothing for a moment, just looked at the content of Harry's cauldron, which was a deflating draft and was perfect, and then at Harry, and something moved in his expression that was not the usual controlled complex thing but was instead simpler and more urgent. Stay alert, Snape said, very quietly. Just that. Harry looked at him. I am, he said, equally quiet. Snape moved on. Harry watched him go and felt the mirror warm in his pocket simultaneously, which answered the question he was about to ask. He pressed his thumbs to it under the desk. Dumbledore's voice, Harry. I've just been told, Quirrell was not at dinner last night. He wasn't in his office this morning. The third floor, I know, Harry said. I'm going now, Harry said. Don't come back on my account. We've got it. A pause that contained about 6 different arguments that Dumbledore visibly decided not to make. The mirror will reach me. Use it. I will, Harry said. He pocketed the mirror and looked at Ron, who had been watching his face for the last 30 seconds and already had his bag packed. Hermione was on Ron's other side. She'd heard enough. She had her bag as well. They left potions. The third-floor corridor was locked. Harry put his wand to the handle and the lock turned without difficulty, which he registered as the first confirmation that his magic was operating at the level he needed it to. The door swung open. The dog was behind it. Fluffy, Hagrid's contribution, a name that was doing a significant amount of diplomatic work given that the creature it referred to was the size of a small house and had 3 separate sets of teeth, was asleep. All 3 heads, deeply under, enormous chest rising and falling in the slow tempo of genuine unconscious rest. A harp on the floor nearby was playing itself, the sound barely above ambient. Something had been here already. Quirrell's ahead of us, Hermione said. Not by much, Harry said, looking at the trapdoor in the floor. The music's still going, it's running on a charm, probably set to last an hour. He hasn't been through here long. He crossed the room in 8 steps, lifted the trapdoor, and looked down into darkness. I'll go first. He went in feet first without a rope or a pause and fell, and the darkness received him with the particular softness of something living. He hit the devil's snare before he understood what it was, and then he understood what it was, and he stopped moving completely, every muscle deliberately stilled, because the books had been clear and Hermione had drilled this. Hermione came down a second later, also still. Ron came last and panicked for exactly 3 seconds before Harry said, "Stop moving," in a flat, calm voice, and Ron stopped. "Relax," Hermione said. "Like water. Let it," the plant loosened. All 3 of them dropped into the lower chamber. "You two all right?" Harry said, landing. "Fine," Hermione said. "Ron." "Brilliant," Ron said, in the tone of someone who meant the opposite but was going to say brilliant anyway as a matter of principle. The winged keys were exactly as Dumbledore had described, hundreds of them, darting through the air of an enormous dark chamber. Harry spotted the broomstick before he spotted the next door. He also spotted the particular damage to the wing of one silver key that meant it had been used recently. He was on the broom in 4 seconds. In the air in 5. The key was fast and it had been through once already, which made it erratic rather than patterned. Harry tracked it with his eyes the way he tracked the snitch, not trying to predict, just staying present, letting the motion of it come to him rather than imposing a line on it. He caught it on the second pass. Landed, unlocked the door. "That was 30 seconds, Hermione said. "The snitch is faster," Harry said. The chess room was enormous and dark and the pieces were already in formation, also recently disturbed on one side, where Quirrell had presumably blasted or charmed his way through in the way someone without a natural chess intuition would. Ron stood at the edge of the board and looked at it for exactly 15 seconds. Harry watched him do it, watched the specific quality of attention come over Ron's face, the particular expression of someone whose intelligence operated on a different wavelength in this context, finding a pattern in 3 dimensions that would have taken Harry considerably longer. "I've got it," Ron said. "Take those 2 squares and hold them," he told Hermione and Harry, pointing. "Whatever happens, stay there." "Ron," Hermione started. "I know what I'm doing," he said, with complete simplicity. Not bravado. Just fact. He walked to the knight's square. What followed was 4 minutes of Ron Weasley at the absolute apex of his particular and considerable genius, playing chess against enchanted pieces in a dark chamber under a school, calling moves with the economy of someone who was several moves ahead of a situation and knew it. He took pieces, sacrificed a pawn, redirected a bishop, and then stood in the center of the board and said, "I'm going to be knocked out. Don't stop, get through the door." "Ron," Harry said. "It's one move," Ron said. "Checkmate, one move after this. I have to let them take me." He looked at Harry with the absolute clarity of someone who has made a decision and is completely at peace with it. "Go win," he said. The Queen's piece moved. Ron hit the stone floor and didn't get up. "Go," Harry said to Hermione, who was already moving, already at the door, her face doing the thing it did when she was feeling something significant and had decided that feeling it later was both necessary and more appropriate. The next chamber had a troll, already unconscious, dispatched with less elegance than whoever was ahead of them would have liked, knocked cold by their own borrowed implements. Harry stepped over it. The logic puzzle was Hermione's room, clearly designed by someone who understood what kind of mind a particular problem would stop versus let through. The bottles were already disturbed, one missing. Hermione read the clues in 40 seconds and identified the remaining correct bottle in 45. "There's only enough here for one person to go forward," she said. "Then that's me," Harry said. She looked at him. She opened her mouth. "Ron needs someone," Harry said. "And you need to be where you can get back out and contact McGonagall. You're the one who can do both of those things right now." He held her gaze. "I'll be fine." She looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone processing the specific difficulty of trusting a person who was also, demonstrably, correct. "The mirror," she said. "The second you're through." "Yes." "And if Dumbledore doesn't answer, McGonagall," he said. "Through you." "I know." He took the bottle she held out. "Go back up. Get Ron sorted. Wait." She pressed her lips together, and for one moment she looked 11 years old, which she usually didn't, and he thought that was important to notice. "Be careful," she said, which was not what she meant. What she meant was considerably more than that, but covered it. "Always," he said. He drank the potion and went through the black flames. The final chamber was underground, cold and lit by a strange ambient glow that came from no specific source and turned everything slightly blue. The mirror of Eriste stood at the far end. Between Harry and the mirror, Quirinus Quirrell. He was standing with his back to Harry, looking at the mirror's surface. He turned when he heard Harry enter, which told Harry that whatever he'd been expecting, it wasn't this. His face went through 3 separate configurations before settling on the one that contained the most composed version of his current reality. "Potter," he said. "Quirrell," Harry said. He looked at the man properly, without the classroom context, without the other students, without the performance of the stutter that had apparently been maintained for months. What he saw was someone under enormous strain, not the surface strain of the nervous defense professor, but something deeper. A man being used in a way that was costing him things he wouldn't get back. Harry felt no fear. He felt clarity. And underneath the clarity, something that wasn't quite anger but was related to anger the way a fire is related to the thing that started it. "You shouldn't be here," Quirrell said, and the stutter was gone entirely, the voice clean and tired and entirely wrong in the way Harry had heard through the staff room door. "Neither should you," Harry said. He looked at the mirror. He couldn't see his own reflection from this angle, just the frame and the back of Quirrell's head in the glass. "You can't get the stone," he said. "The mirror doesn't work that way." "And you know how it works," Quirrell said. It wasn't a question. "I know how it works." "Then you can get it for me," Quirrell said, and the quality in his voice shifted, not to malice, but to something more desperate, which was in some ways worse. "Or he can." The voice that came from somewhere behind Quirrell's face was the one Harry had heard in the staff room corridor. It settled in the room like something cold. Harry looked at Quirrell's face and understood the full shape of it for the first time, the man with a parasite. The host. He thought about what it cost to carry something like that. No, Harry said. He walked to the mirror. He stood in front of it and looked at his own reflection, and what he saw was not what he expected. He'd thought about this, about Dumbledore's description of the mirror's mechanism, gives the stone only to someone who wants to find it but not use it. He'd wondered what that meant in practical terms, whether the desire mechanism could be gamed by having a cleaner relationship to the object than Quirrell did. What he saw in the mirror was himself. Just himself, not a vision of a different life or a different world or a pile of gold or even his parents, which was what the mirror apparently showed most people. Just Harry, standing in the chamber, looking back. And in his reflection's hand, something appeared. A small glittering thing, red gold, falling from the reflected Harry's palm into the reflected Harry's pocket. Harry felt something solid and warm drop into his actual pocket. He didn't reach for it. Didn't look down. Kept his face completely neutral. Well? Quirrell said, behind him. I don't see it, Harry said. Just myself. Move aside. Quirrell pushed past him and stared into the mirror, and his face contorted with the specific frustration of someone who wants a thing they can see reflected in someone else's eyes and cannot reach. Let me, I see it, I see it, I see the stone but I can't, the voice from the back of his head, again. Sharper. Use the boy. Make him look again. I already looked, Harry said. Nothing. He stepped back slightly, getting space. He pressed his right hand, briefly, against the outside of his pocket. Solid. Real. There. He pressed his left thumb and forefinger to the mirror. Dumbledore. Nothing came back. London, still. No warmth. He pressed harder. Held it. Harry. The mirror warmed. Are you, third chamber? I have the stone. Quirrell's here. Voldemort's on him. A pause that compressed several seconds of calculation into something that felt like an inhale. I'm coming. Don't let Quirrell take the stone. Don't let him touch you if you can help it. Why can't he touch me? Dumbledore's response was immediate, your mother's protection. It lives in your skin. Physical contact with him should be painful for whatever is on him. Harry put the mirror away. Quirrell was still at the mirror. The voice behind his face was saying something low and insistent, the words blurring into each other in a way that had the quality of pressure rather than communication. Quirrell was beginning to crack under it, his hands on the mirror's frame were shaking, his shoulders locked, the strain of being two things at once taking visible physical toll. Harry moved to the side of the room, giving himself space and positioning. He needed to hold this until Dumbledore arrived. He needed Quirrell not to get the stone. He needed to not do anything that escalated the situation past what the room could handle. Quirrell spun from the mirror. His face was beyond desperation now, past the negotiation stage, in the place where people made choices they'd been building toward without knowing it. Give me the stone, he said. I can feel that you have it. He can feel it. He took a step toward Harry. No, Harry said. Then he'll take it. Another step. He's stronger than anything then he can come out and try, Harry said. The room went very still. The voice said, turn around, Quirrell. Quirrell turned. And on the back of his head, beneath the turban that unraveled with the specific horror of something that should not be seen being revealed, was a face. It was not a face in any complete sense, more like the idea of a face, mapped onto the back of a skull, white and flat and serpent-nosed with eyes that were red and entirely clear. The kind of clarity that came not from honesty but from absolute, singular, uncompromised purpose. Harry looked at it. He had expected fear. He had expected the primal, instinctive recoil that his body had produced in the staffroom corridor at the sound of that voice. What he felt instead was, simpler. Cleaner. An absolutely unclouded recognition of the thing in front of him, and a correspondingly absolute lack of interest in making room for it. "Harry Potter," the face said. "Voldemort," Harry said. "Join me," it said. "You have your mother's power in your blood. With mine, you could be extraordinary." "I already am," Harry said, and took 3 fast steps forward and grabbed Quirrell's face with both hands. The effect was immediate and total. Quirrell screamed, not the voice, Quirrell himself, the man under the parasite, and the skin beneath Harry's hands began to blister and crack, the dark magic in the contact meeting the protection in Harry's blood with the same catastrophic incompatibility of 2 forces that simply could not occupy the same space. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was screaming too, something below the register of hearing, something that went through the stone walls and made the mirror of Erist ring like a struck bell. Harry held on. He held on because letting go was the only thing that failed, and he'd decided, years ago in a dark cupboard, that failing was not something he intended to do with his body when it was the only tool he had. Quirrell fell. Harry's hands left him and the room lurched, and the ambient light went wrong, and the face detached from the back of Quirrell's head with the sound of something being torn that should not be torn, rising like smoke, screaming without sound, and it moved toward Harry, toward him, through him, and the cold that came with it was unlike any cold Harry had felt, the cold of something that had once been human and wasn't anymore. It passed through him like a hand reaching into ice water and finding nothing to grip. He felt it leave. He felt the chamber's air normalize. He felt Quirrell on the floor, breathing, barely, the skin of his hands where Harry had grabbed them already damaged beyond simple healing. And he felt the stone in his pocket, solid and warm and entirely itself. Harry sat down on the floor because his legs thought that was appropriate, and pressed his back against the cold stone of the wall, and took one very even breath. Then the chamber door opened and Dumbledore came through it moving faster than someone his age should have been able to move, and stopped when he saw Harry sitting on the floor alive, and the breath he drew was not an old man's controlled breath but something much more human. "Harry," he said. "I've got the stone," Harry said. "Quirrell needs medical attention immediately. He may not make it." He paused. "Voldemort's gone. He passed through me and couldn't hold on." Dumbledore crossed the chamber in 4 steps and crouched beside Harry in a way that suggested his knees were going to have strong feelings about this later and he did not currently care. He looked at Harry's hands, reddened, slightly burned at the palms, and at Harry's face, which was entirely present and entirely coherent. "Are you hurt?" he said. "Hands," Harry said. "Otherwise no." Dumbledore put his own hand over Harry's, the burned ones, very gently, and Harry felt something warm move through them, not healing exactly, but the quality of something that made the pain present rather than overwhelming. "The stone," Harry said, reaching into his pocket. "Keep it," Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him. "What?" "For now," Dumbledore said. "Until I can speak with Nicholas. It's safer with you, currently, than anywhere else in this building." He looked at Harry with the specific expression that Harry had started to understand meant Dumbledore had just said something that surprised himself. "You earned that right in the last 4 minutes." "The mirror," Harry said. "The mechanism. It gave it to me because I didn't need it." "Yes. But I went in knowing I didn't need it," Harry said. "Which means the mechanism worked because I was honest about my purpose. Which means that what protected the stone was not cleverness but character," Dumbledore said. "Which is, in my experience, the more reliable protection." He stood, slowly, and held a hand down to Harry. Harry took it and got up. "Your friends," Dumbledore said. "Ron was hit by the chess pieces. Hermione went back up to get help and wait. Harry pocketed the stone. They both did exactly what needed doing." "They did," Dumbledore said. "Come." They walked back through the chambers, Dumbledore doing something to the devil's snare that made it retreat entirely from the passage, conjuring light in the key room, navigating the chess room where Ron's unconscious form still lay crumpled on the board. Dumbledore stopped there and did something careful and specific over Ron's head, and Ron made a sound and didn't wake but his breathing deepened and steadied. He'll be fine, Dumbledore said. A few hours. He let the Queen take him on purpose, Harry said. He saw the winning move and took the sacrifice. Dumbledore looked at Ron Weasley lying unconscious on an enchanted chessboard in a chamber under his school and had an expression that was composed of several things Harry couldn't fully name. He's a good friend to you, he said. The best, Harry said, which he meant completely and without embellishment. They came up through the trapdoor and Fluffy was still asleep, the harp still playing, and Hermione was in the corridor outside with McGonagall beside her, both of them turning simultaneously when the door opened. Hermione moved toward Harry before she'd finished turning and stopped herself about 2 feet from him because she'd apparently been preparing that self-stop for however long she'd been waiting. You're okay, she said. Not a question, a confirmation, checking against visual evidence. I'm fine, Harry said. Ron's down there, he's okay, he'll need a few hours. The stone's safe. He looked at her. You got McGonagall. Of course I got McGonagall, she said, with mild indignation. You said McGonagall. I know, Harry said. Good. McGonagall was looking at Harry with the expression she'd had in Dumbledore's office in August, the one underneath the professional one, the one that required a specific kind of trust to let out. She looked at his burned hands and at his face and at the quality of him, intact, present, entirely himself, and then she looked at Dumbledore with an expression that was the visual equivalent of "we are going to have a very thorough conversation about this later." Dumbledore met it with the expression of someone who had already fully accepted that conversation. Hospital wing, McGonagall said. To Harry, firmly. Not a suggestion. The troll's still down there, Harry said. Quirrell needs retrieval. I'll handle it, Dumbledore said. You go. Harry went. In the corridor, walking toward the hospital wing with Hermione beside him and McGonagall ahead, Harry reached into his pocket and felt the shape of the stone. Small, impossibly warm, real. Did you get it? Hermione said, very quietly. Yes, he said, equally quiet. She made a sound that was not quite a word but contained the information of several. Then she said, Ron's going to be absolutely insufferable when he finds out his chess sacrifice actually worked. He should be, Harry said. It did work. I know, she said. I'm not complaining. The castle corridors were empty, it was late, past curfew, past dinner, past the last students going to bed. The torches burned. Their footsteps were the only sound. Harry walked through it and felt the stone in his pocket and thought about a year-old magic deciding the world needed witnesses. He thought about the 47 transmissions, and the Wizengamot, and Lyra's leather jacket, and McGonagall's hand not quite touching his on the bench, and Ron playing chess in the dark, and Hermione changing replacement to persuasion in her textbook margin on the first day. He thought about the mirror in the final chamber showing him just himself. No wish for a different life, no vision of what should have been. Just himself, standing there, with the stone in his own hand. He understood what that meant. He'd always had exactly what the mirror measured. Even in the cupboard, even in the dark, even at 4 years old crying into a silence that turned out, years later, not to have been silence at all. He'd always been exactly who he was. The hospital wing door opened and Madame Pomfrey descended on his burned hands with professional fury and herbal remedies, and Hermione sat in the chair nearest the bed and opened a book, and outside the castle the Scottish winter did what it always did, which was persist without commentary, and somewhere underneath them Ron Weasley was being levitated toward the same ward and was probably, even unconscious, smiling.